Today I have with me Guy Reffitt, a fellow January 6th defendant. Guy and I were in the DC Gulag for the better part of 2 years together. Guy has been incarcerated for the past 4 years, actually, until recently pardoned by President Trump. Guy was one of the first defendants. He was one of the first inmates in DC that I met. And Guy has been through quite a ride. So I'd like to thank Guy for speaking with me now and giving his perspective on the past 4 years and for telling his story. So I guess first off, Guy, congratulations on being out. Welcome back to America. I usually start off with this. Who are you really? Who is Guy Reffitt? How is Guy Reffitt, the actual man, different from the caricature that was portrayed by the press and by the government? Who really are you as a man? And what would you like the world to know about you?
That's a good question, actually, because I don't know what the world actually ever really thought about me. I just was always doing my thing. I was a working man. I was a father, and I was traveling the world, drilling oil wells around different countries for the world's largest oil companies like Kuwait Oil Company, Saudi Aramco, just all over the world. Busy. I never really had much time for all the bullshit that goes on in the normal aspects of things. When I wasn't working somewhere busy, I was always spending time with the wife and the kids somewhere. We'd take vacations or we'd travel. We would do things together and have a good life. I mean, it was just what we did. It was, the oil business is an up and down ride. Sometimes it goes really high and you get a lot of money, and then the oil crashes out and you struggle through that. But, for the most part, in society, I usually kept my head down, stayed out the way.
I mean, when I think of January 6th and the people I've met along the way, really, you, a decent amount of those who we were incarcerated with it. I always say that January 6th defendants represent a fair cross-section of society, but I actually think I might be downplaying it. I mean, you being in the oil industry, a significant amount of those of us who were in DC especially were veterans or blue-collar workers, essentially salt of the earth types. So it's very interesting. I asked that question. I asked that question because I think it's important people understand. The vast majority of people there were regular Americans who had, the same struggles, the same needs, the same interests, the same beliefs as pretty much everybody in the country. And so, when you look at the headlines that come and, to portray us as insurrectionists, portray us as people who were anti-American, when in reality, you yourself and pretty much everybody there were just trying to preserve the American dream. And so leading off of that, I'd like to ask, what was your motivation for going to Washington, D.C.? Because even though I think we're all Americans, the logical extension of that is that we're all individuals. The entailment is that we had our own pursuits. So I just went there myself to hear President Trump speak. I didn't know there was even going to be a protest at the Capitol. Some people went there to protest COVID lockdowns. Some people were there for election integrity. What motivated you to go to Washington, D.C.?
I went for the Trump rally. I mean, I really never was much of a political, person as far as I'd always made me talk trash about whatever president was in office, from way back, but I never was a voter. So I never really did care about voting until I got married to my wife, Nicole. And as most anybody who knows who she is and what she's done knows, that she's quite politically active, and she always really has been. And she always told me, if you until you vote, you don't get to just sit here and talk trash about them. I said, okay. So I started voting, and then I got involved in voting, and then Trump came along, and I was like, well, this guy's got pretty much all the ideology that I believe in, that this country needs. That it's really been backsliding into some kind of an insanity hole of really and truly what I would say, without slipping into a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, because I don't really like that kind of shit, is that my view of things when I decided to get into politics, being an analytical and a logical kind of a thinker, is that I'm looking at it from a 30,000 foot view, and I'm saying, well, America seems to be getting taken over by a communist ideology coming up from underneath, seeping up from underneath, where people don't really look down very often. And when Trump came along, I saw a change that could happen in this country, and I really liked him. So I decided I liked him, and I voted for him. And when it came time for the election in 2020, I felt like that there were so many anomalies in that election that it was a bunch of garbage, and there was too many problems that made any sense. But I wanted to go and support him in the last chance I was going to see a person I thought could have been the biggest change to our country since the founding fathers. And so I supported Donald Trump, decided to go to that rally. And yeah, I did travel halfway across the country from Texas to go to that rally. And in my mind, I thought, when this rally's over with, I'll probably walk down there to the Capitol and, say my piece. I just watched 2020 basically burn down the country, and I thought, well, I can go and say what the hell I want to. My First Amendment right stands just as strong as anybody else's in this country, so I'm going to go talk my shit with my megaphone. And so I walked down there after the rally, and when I got there, it was about 40-something minutes after the breach had happened, and everybody, a lot of people were on the property. I would say from when I got there, probably an easy 150,000 people on the actual Capitol grounds, and by the time it was over with, I think I probably would estimate 250,000 were actually on the property. But when I got there, I went there with a megaphone, because honestly, I thought we were going to be protesting from way the hell out there where you normally see it on TV, because how in the hell would anybody literally be able to get that close to the building whenever, that's probably the most secure property in the world. And when I got there about 40-something minutes after the first breach, I realized there was all those people there, and I thought, well, shit. Well, I could see all the way up to the steps of the Capitol, and I said, well, I'm going to go to the steps of the Capitol building, because I was 48 at the time. All my life, I always heard, you got a complaint, you don't like something, what's going on in your country, you got to protest. The most important place you can take it is to the steps of the Capitol. And I thought, well, shit, look at that. They're at the steps of the Capitol. What? Well, how did this happen? This just seems like all that niche crap that I heard all my life is just coming to, there it is right there. I should go right there and with my megaphone and talk shit. It's a little closer. They'll hear me better now, instead of way the hell out there by the, out there on the edge of the, way the hell out there where they had the fences and stuff.
The process is working. The process is working.
Yeah, I was like, well, look at there. How about that shit? And then I get there and I stand up with my megaphone and I say maybe a few words. I don't even remember what the hell I said before 6 seconds had passed, and they just started shooting me with pepper balls like crazy. And then that went on for like 20-something shots at me, and then they come down and sprayed me in the face, and that was pretty much the end of my story, really. 2 minutes and 8 seconds, and I was wrecked out.
It's, what's interesting is that I don't want to force you to, I want to be careful with how I phrase this. They alleged that you had a firearm or whatever in a holster, but it's interesting that you never brandished a firearm, actually. And in fact, you're the one who was shot. And if I recall correctly, they didn't just shoot you with pepper balls. Didn't they hit you with ceramic rounds in the torso?
It did.
Yeah.
Yep. So the first rounds were through a Tippmann 98 pepper ball with a hopper, which allowed them to shoot me. I mean, I heard 22 air releases on that one, and at some point I heard the FN 303, which is the ceramic weighted projectiles, and as they explained it in trial, they have a spin factor for extra effect. Yeah, I got hit with a few of those too. And yeah, I mean, they talk about a firearm, and they say, "Oh, well, look, there's something under his jacket right there." We're pretty sure we think that's a holster. So through the whole trial, they didn't discuss specifically a firearm. They discussed a holster. They never produced a picture that actually shows a firearm. They never actually produced evidence beyond a reasonable doubt there was a firearm. And the holster they kept talking about, they never seized from my house. They actually went and bought the holster that they produced for the jury from Amazon.com. And they brought that into trial to show the jury. And they never really actually proved any kind of a firearm whatsoever. You don't see one brandished. They never have actually showed a firearm anywhere in D.C., around D.C., or any of that shit. They did exactly the same thing with that as they did with everything in my trial and sentencing. They made it all whatever they wanted to make it. And they did a fine job for a bunch of Democrats who were willing to crucify us anyway, because they were eating that shit up, having a great time with it.
Well,
the jury was never going to find us guilty anyway. They were never going to find us innocent. They were always going to find us guilty.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned they ordered the holster off Amazon, but even further than that, they also, if I recall, they took cell phone video and then quote unquote enhanced it in order to identify the holster, meaning that the only evidence they really had was basically fabricated evidence.
Yep. Well, and they admitted to that in trial. They said, my attorney said, this is an enhanced picture. And the prosecutor said, yeah, or the agent said, yeah, we enhanced it.
I mean, that sounds like tampering, not just tampering with evidence. It sounds like fabricating evidence. And
yeah,
it didn't even further. You had mentioned for the for the holster, they had gotten that off Amazon, but when they raided your home and they took photos of your arms and ammunition and all that, didn't they specifically, how do I put this? Didn't they position everything to make it look more menacing and as if you were plotting something, organizing the stuff in your closets or your safes to make it look like you were planning something, when really they were the ones positioning it to make it look like that?
Yeah, the funny thing is that my carrier for my ceramic, my body armor, the plates, the carrier for my body armor plates, within the carrier, of course, it has all these pockets, these external pockets. And they had taken and filled each and every one of those pockets in the front with loaded magazines from inside my safe, which I had never done that. So they had taken and put in these loaded magazines in the carrier pockets to imply that I had, loaded all these magazines and stuck them in my carrier and was prepared for some kind of battle. And I never did that. But they did a few other things where they had placed a few things in there that were not in their normal place. I'm a very meticulous OCD kind of guy. I don't do the things that they portrayed. But that was part of the game. That's not uncommon. We've been hearing that a lot in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what we're up against. It's probably a very good reason of why. It is a very great reason why a lot of these agents are being fired now.
It's interesting the amount of evidence that's fabricated or the way they frame certain things, but even then, like the narratives are, I would say, even worse than the fabricated evidence, because even testimony and narratives and innuendo are fabricated evidence in and of themselves. So, like, one of the narratives I recall when they, and it's not unique to you, you know, like, I know about a dozen people have been called the spear of, you know,
Tip of the spear, yeah.
the spearhead. They were the spearhead of the insurrection. You know, you were called the spear tip, or whatever. It's some stupid thing like that. But I remember there was a point in the jail when we finally got CCTV that was hidden and then released late as a batch of video. And they tried to frame it as though you were the leader of the breach on the Northwest scaffold. But it turned out you were like the third or fourth person to show up where they claimed you were actually the first. And the official government timeline, from what I recall, actually said that several people were arrested, and then it seemed like they were released and never named or identified before you showed up. So, I don't know, were you the spearhead of the insurrection?
Yeah, see, that was the crazy part was, the whole case in chief during my trial was to try to prove to the jury that everything was my fault, that it all started because of me, and had it not been for me, January 6th would have never happened. And they said that I was the tip of the spear of the mob, was the quote that the prosecutor used. And they said, well, Mr. Reffitt stood up there and he led the charge and it was all him. But then, and my trial was the first week of March, the last couple of days of February, first week of March. And then I think it was July 22nd or 23rd. Then they produced some more video to the discovery. And in that discovery, in that video, in one of those videos, I found that I was not even close to the tip of the spear, nor was I near the first at all up those stairs, that I was like the third or the fourth person up there. And during sentencing, I produced that, but nobody seemed to give a shit. But yeah, no, they tried to call me the tip of the spear, and it was all my fault. And I don't know who those people were that were up the stairs before me. And weird, oddly as it was, is those people had gone up, and the cameras didn't get raised from literally staring at the ground. And I'd say that in the most actual sense you could think of. But the CCTV cameras that they finally did point at me when I stood up there and they started shooting me, they were literally pointing at the ground before that. So the other people that went up the stairs, they weren't seen until I got that video in July. So nobody even knew that, and that's not uncommon either, because that's pretty similar to like Thomas Webster's case, where he was in defense of himself and defense of others because the officer, he said attacked him first, but they couldn't see that on the body-worn camera videos. But when I looked back through the CCTV cameras from the dome on the west side, I could zoom in and you could see Officer Noah Rathbun actually punch Thomas Webster in the side of the head in an aggravated, violent fashion. And of course, yeah, he was in defense of himself, but they never produced that in his trial.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of shit we're up against. They give you something that they know they already have, but then they don't give you everything because they know that it's going to take most people forever to dig through all that stuff. And it did take a while for me to dig that out, and for Thomas Webster, and it took me well after my trial to find that video that shows that I was not everything their case in chief tried to prove that I was. And I proved in that one video that I was nothing what they said. But here we go again. Nobody gives a shit.
Right.
And it took Donald J. Trump to pardon us and clear this crap out. I was going to win in appeals, but the system is broken. It's the process is the punishment. Yeah. And as long as the process can punish you once you get stuck in the process, you could be doing this for years before you actually get cleared out.
Yeah. And funny enough, Pete Schwartz actually won his case on appeal, and they still kept him in prison until the pardons were issued.
Right.
Yeah, it's a it's
That's
a
the
it's
same with me. That's the same with me. I literally won my appeal. I won my appeal by proxy through Larry Brock's appeal because we had the exact same argument, and he won March 1st of 2024.
yeah.
And then I wanted to be released pending my appeal, and in April 10th, the judge denied me that. And it's like, but I literally won. Why, she just wouldn't let me out. And so I had to sit there until, just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
To even get to the point. I mean, she resentenced me on the fact that I still I've never actually seen my appeal that I won because it's never actually been published. And so the appeal meant that I went from 87 months down to 41 to 51 months, which was completed if you even gave me the highest end of that at 51 months. That was completed in August of 2024. I should have been out by then. But she was intending on sentencing me higher on that specific situation on purpose, and yet she hadn't done that till December 6th when she gave me 7 months less and gave me an 80-month sentence.
And you had Dabney Friedrich, or
Dabney Friedrich, yeah.
What do you think her motivations were in all of this? Because a couple things stand out for me when it comes to Friedrich. The first is that her husband was on the Enron task force, and of course, Enron is the origin of the substatute for 1512 that we all got hit with. The second is that the first defendants to have 1512 upheld for them were DeGrave and his crew, and they're known federal informants. And so, is there a conflict of interest here? Was this just malice? Was this a refusal to admit she was wrong? What do you think what is the motivation of a lot of these judges, but especially with her? What do you think her motivation was in this seemingly very petty ruling against you?
That's a very interesting question because I have so many issues with the way all of that worked out. I mean, she picked the word otherwise out of the two variables within the statute, and she tried to inextricably put them in a way she could make it work. And it's as if she was trying to right a wrong that her husband screwed up back in the day. Perhaps she was involved with that back in at that time. Maybe she did screw that up, and maybe she was involved. I don't know. Another rabbit hole I don't want to go down, but I have problems with the way it all worked out because she screwed up and actually gave us the statute, and she should have never. And she was the leading opinion, and they all followed her brake lights right into the ditch on that. Mm-hmm. And then she turned around, and when the appeal comes down, she loses. She sentences me. So originally she sentences me on that, in that factor, and gives me all the enhancements to the statute, which most everyone had said no. Those enhancements aren't going to be applicable to this because that's not how the statute's written, and it's certainly not how the sentencing guidelines are written. The administration of justice factor that really caused problems. Every defense attorney said that that doesn't fit. Why did the judge want to give it so damn bad when everybody thought that it was all wrong? If she's really that fucking smart, why is she so fucking stupid?
That's $1 million question right there.
You can quote me on that one because I honestly I'm actually really saddened that these people who set themselves in positions of power like that, after they go through a college or a university and they come out and they're so fucking pompous and so fucking arrogant that they feel like they can do whatever they want and be so wrong, and with an air of arrogance that rolls, it seethes off of them. Like, it's gross, it's disgusting, and it reeks of communism.
Well, that's it. The saying is always like, never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. But in my case, we beat the enhancements in my case. And I was hoping that at my sentencing, when we beat the enhancements, that would be like a blueprint that going forward, that would be a good precedent. And I guess it was in the long term, but in the short term, it didn't seem to matter. And in the immediate, my judge gave me an upward variance. So like, I should have been sentenced to 21 months max, something like that, 17 to 21. I ended up getting 4 years. So even though we beat the enhancements, my judge still was so petty that he needed to make an example out of me. But the question to me is, in the back of my head is, well, was McFadden, was he just trying to be a hard ass, or was this coming from above? I don't know. I can't know what the motivations were for these judges, because it seemed like seemingly Nichols was basically the only one that halfway through this debacle was just like, this is bullshit, I'm not going along with it. But it seemed like for the most part, no matter who appointed them, Trump, Obama, Reagan, it didn't matter. They all seemed to get their marching orders, maybe from Howell. I don't know. But it just seemed like this was extremely coordinated. And I would like to think in our system we have an independent judiciary. But the truth is, these judges are very political. And so I don't know what you think about that in terms of whether they were following orders, whether they were just so biased because they're just part of the machine. I don't know, but I don't know. What is your perspective on that? If you have one, I'm sure you have the same questions in the back of your head. We can really never know, but
my head aches thinking about half of the shit that goes on within the industrial complex that is the Department of Convictions. Because honestly, it's not the Department of Justice, is it? It's just the Department of Convictions.
Yeah.
But it seems like, okay, so if 99.6% of convictions come by way of plea agreements, and people are scared into taking a plea agreement, and people are scared of the government and say, well, if I go to trial, they'll slaughter me. I'll take the plea agreement. I'll bend the knee and I'll kiss the powerful ring and do whatever it takes to, just knock the balls out of the way and get this thing right off, But if that's the case for just us common folk, us blue collar workers that live life and don't have time for this stupid bullshit, and does the government scare those judges too? Are they so scared that the government said, no, this is what we want? No, Your Honor, we definitely want to keep this 1512C2. No, I know you're arguing with me about this, but we're the government. No, Your Honor, I really just want, no, it's a catch-all, Your Honor. This is our catch-all clause. This is our statute where we can catch-all. We want to use this one. So, you give us this opportunity to continue with running with this one. And the judges say, oh, okay, well, the government says so, and I don't really want to fuck with the government because, they screw you. They can screw me too. So did they just follow along? Are they scared too? I mean, if that's the case, then, already the people are being oppressed. Are the judges oppressed, or is it really that choreographed that they were all fucking involved too? I don't, those are rabbit holes, and again, conspiracy theories. I'm not a fan of them. I just have questions because I don't have clean answers. Yeah. I do think we need to go in and we need to look at every one of those communications between each of these judges and each of these prosecutors and each of these defense attorneys. We need to see all those communications, because to me, inside there is a true story. Because I know for a fact that on October 15th of 2022, maybe 2021, before my trial, months before my trial, that the prosecutor and the judge and my attorney were speaking to each other in ways that I caught on to in the discussions that were going on in the hearing when I had an ex parte with the judge and my defense attorney. And I caught on to the fact that they were incommunicado in ways that they should not have been without me present. And so there is something going on that that they're not letting us know. They're not supposed to be doing it in that fashion against the defendant, but they are working together in concert. And I caught that also in this other case that I'm dealing with in Texas, that there is communicado. There is communication between these people in ways that shouldn't be happening, not in the way they're doing it. So I would love to see in the January 6 cases from the Department of Justice and the FBI, I would like to see what these emails show, the communications between the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorneys, because there just reeks of nefarious activity, and it's about as pernicious as any American would want to vomit over.
Yeah, I suspect there's quite a lot we haven't seen behind the scenes, and that if it were all to come out, I think it would convict quite a few people of really railroading us intentionally. But, I think that there was probably collusion between all three branches of government. When I think of, I'm sure you've seen the body camera, you recall some of those MPD officers showed up and they're saying to each other, they set us up. And I always make the observation, well, who set them up? Because if President Trump offered them National Guard support, who set them up? Because the Capitol PD answered at the time to Nancy Pelosi in Congress, and the MPD answered to Mayor Bowser. And then, of course, I go back to the thing with the 1512 and the judges, and of course there's the prosecutors. It just seems like there was this incestuous relationship the entire time, and they were all, and I would say even the Republicans in Congress, again, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, but maybe I think it's more of a conspiracy guess. I don't know. But I feel like all of them were pushing the insurrection narrative, and they were weaponizing these stupid statutes. I mean, the 1512, went back to Enron, but then you have the civil disorder that went back to the Civil Obedience Act, I think, of 1968. It was a race riot era thing. The seditious conspiracy with the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, that went back to Confederate officers. I mean, all these statutes need to be wiped off the books, but I think it was a very deliberate thing to go through, the statute book and resurrect these anachronistic things in order to, put us away, hopefully for life from their perspective.
Here's a fun fact. I believe I've spoke with you about this before, but the 1512C2 was actually discussed in the Mueller report as far as the Trump investigation went. It was discussed in the Mueller report. This 1512C2 was explained that it was ambiguous and too vague to use as a statute as a criminal for criminal prosecution, and that was I forget when that was, 2018, I believe it was, that the Mueller report came out and discussed the 1512C2. And then December of 2020, and I can't remember the exact day of December, and I'm looking it up now. Legal scholars in Texas published an opinion that they too also agreed that this 1512C2 statute was not properly dealt with or written for it to be used without it being ambiguous in ways that could be, overturned. And so it's weird that 1 month later, after that was written and published, that this 1512C2 statute had become so so widely discussed between when Trump was when it came to dealing with Trump. It's almost like the whole thing was orchestrated in a way for it to be used as their catch-all weapon. And it would take the Supreme Court to clarify the statute. And to this day, it hasn't been rewritten and it hasn't been revised that I'm aware of. And so is it going to remain a catch-all? The Supreme Court did say, anybody could get hit with it, but I don't know that Congress has rewritten it at this point.
No, and I would assume they're going to leave it on the books instead of rewriting it, but they'll just use the ruling as a guideline on how to use it in the future. Essentially, what the original intent was, of course, for destruction of documents rather than the whole catch-all thing. Because anything that's a catch-all could ultimately be seen as overly vague and thus unconstitutional. But, again, the way they use it against... Yeah.
It's another way to wrap us up into the process, knowing good and well that it won't stick, but sticking us in the process, and the process being the punishment, we would have to go through, had it not been for Donald Trump, the entire process to the Supreme Court. Each relatively one of our cases would have to make it up there like Fisher's did. And that was the only way we were going to get there. Now, Fisher made it through there, and that helped, but it's still, they used other ways, like with me. Everything should have been washed away when I went to resentencing December 6th, but that didn't happen because the judge pulled another tool out of her little toolbox and decided, oh, look, I've got this one too, Mr. Reffitt. And that's when I unleashed on her and cussed her out, and the prosecutor and everybody. I didn't give a shit. I was mad. I knew they were going to do what they did because they have all those tools that they can use if they want. And that is a tyrannical system. Again, we're back to the founding fathers and the Federalist Papers and the documents of the Constitution and all that says that this isn't supposed to be happening. And if we continue to allow this to happen, well, then we're no better than we were before we became this country.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, our legal system, I always say that the common law system is a beautiful system, and it's endured quite a lot, but it's also delicate because any bad precedent you set will ripple for generations before it's corrected. So, I mean, and again, I don't particularly care about the abortion issue, but you look at the time between Roe v. Wade and then the Dobbs decision, that was what, 70 years pretty much. I mean, you look at, was it Plessy, Ferguson, and then Brown versus the Board of Education. Those rulings took decades, those were decades apart. And so if we didn't, God forbid, if the Supreme Court hadn't ruled the way it had with 1512, I still think ultimately, when Trump got in, it would have been resolved. But he was hit with 1512 as well. And so, I mean, this is something that theoretically could have been weaponized by any administration for decades, maybe generations. But yeah, our system was designed. Our system was designed for, the statutes are supposed to be specific. There's the mens rea elements, and when something is too overly vague, it can be weaponized like it was, and unfortunately. But yeah, I think it would be nice if they could just prune half of the statutes we have on the books as it is, because as I mentioned earlier, you have all those anachronistic, archaic statutes that are just sitting there waiting to be abused. The legal system should be updated to suit the needs of the public. And meanwhile, I don't think the average American even knows what the laws are, and that's not a good legal system.
Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch just wrote and discussed on TV and an interview I believe he did with, I forget who it was, but he said, we are overloaded with statutes, laws, and legislative regulations that we have no idea that we're committing federal and felony crimes on a regular basis because there's just so many. They're superfluous, but we don't even know what they are.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. They used the toolkit, and they continue to show that they have those tools just laying around, like the 1512C2 or the departure that Friedrich used to enhance my sentence back all the way up to an 80-month versus the 41 to 51 that the sentencing guidelines called for. And the original sentencing, she stuck absolutely to the T on the sentencing guidelines. But when it would come to resentencing, she's like, yeah, we'll just throw that shit out the window because that's not what I want. I got to give you more. Yeah. I gotta be that horrible, horrible person to you, Mr. Reffitt, because you're just a horrible person, and even though I'm telling everyone while I'm making this sentence relevant for you that you really didn't do anything, as I'm telling everyone you didn't really do anything, and you didn't go in the building, you didn't brandish a weapon, you didn't break anything, you didn't touch anybody, you didn't steal anything, but you're a horrible bastard. Because as the government is portrayed to this court, you had and I'll quote, the means and the wherewithal to take over the government, end quote. And also that, quote, you had your intent, what was the quote? Your stated goal was to take over the government, end quote. It's like, you people are mad as a hatter. You're mad as a hatter. What is wrong with you people? My expletive-laden rant, as the Washington Post put, I was in my feelings that day.
Yeah. Well, I think understandably so. It's like, not for nothing, but like, it is interesting. The vast majority, quite a lot of us who got picked up, I think, during the shock and awe campaign, it was what it was called. Those of us who were OG Gulagians, those of us who got picked up very early on. I feel like there was some, I don't know, I feel as though there was a need to co-sign by the courts. There was a need to co-sign the malicious prosecution of a lot of the very first defendants. So you, myself, a lot of us who got picked up very early on had to be made a spectacle of. And then they had to double down. No matter what the verdicts were, no matter what the facts ended up being, no matter if prosecutors and courts were embarrassed, they had to just double down. And again, in my case as well, I got over twice what my guidelines were, simply because the judge needed to make an example out of me. Why? I guess that's kind of probably the reason, I think, is that we all kind of had our scarlet letters, and we had to stay marked. But
and I saw the video that they implied you had done such horrible things in your suit with your little flag and your cool little dance, and I thought, these people really are the enemy within. They are absolutely here to just destroy us, and we got the first taste of the most atrocious legal justice system I've ever seen. It's not justice, it's not justice at all. It was disgusting, and I maybe in the very first trial, watching that show was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know why we don't have cameras in federal courtrooms. If the public knew what went on in those trials, I think they would be a lot more attuned to what we've been through.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like I kind of wish that they didn't stop the practice of having the call-ins, because there was a point people could listen into hearings, but once the trials started happening, they kind of just like, I don't think we want the public to realize that there's no there.
Well, and for me with the trial I was in one courtroom for the trial where we had the jury, and they were sitting in the gallery because of COVID and all that garbage bullshit. But we had that courtroom. But then you had another courtroom that there were cameras that were video telecasting it into that other courtroom, and that was for the public. And then there was a third courtroom where the video was also simulcast into that courtroom, and that courtroom was literally just for media, and yet they watched it and they could see it, but it wasn't telecast out to the rest of the country or the world, and the media just said whatever they wanted. Well, not reality, just whatever they wanted. completely convoluted the entire trial into a bunch of garbage. I mean, it was crazy how the media worked in concert with the court, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, and the entire government, all in hand in hand. They were all just frolicking around, going, "Watch us destroy these people! Isn't it going to be fun?"
Yeah. Well, nothing proves to me more that like the press were just a propaganda wing of the state than I remember in my trial that who was that cocksucker from NPR, Tom Dreisbach, that little parasite.
Oh,
He came to my trial and he would sit behind Cindy and try to like eavesdrop on our conversations. He's a creep. But these guys, I mean, I'm sure you noticed like the benches for the public are almost never full of public. It's all reporters and propagandists, and they come to these trials and they just misreport or they selectively report things so they can make it, so they can trash you in real time.
They just grab little snippets. They take snapshots and sound bites if they can get themselves a sound bite from their little ideology that they write down that's completely misquoted or misinformation. Would you like to call it, or disinformation? Oh Lord, let's be fair here. That's exactly what they were creating on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And they got to do it however they wanted to, and nobody called them out for it because they could, nobody was there to see it. The other ones were doing the same thing. It's as if they all walked into the same orgy together and said, "Hey, how'd you write it? Let's all do it together." Wait, orgy. Wait, never mind. I think I twisted that up. My bad.
You had me at orgy.
I was like, yeah, there, it's all bad.
I want to talk about your trial, especially because you had the first trial, of course. But first, I want to continue off from where we were before, which is that you went to the Capitol. Maybe you talked some shit, but more or less,
you got some shit.
Which is frankly,
I did.
Which again, a lot of us got hit over innuendo, but this is America. We have the right to say whatever we want.
I'm still talking shit, bro.
as you should. And so like from that point on, they fuck you up. They shoot you. I've seen the pictures. I've seen the bruises all over your torso. And it's just like, I remember it's similar to Jose Padilla, where he's accused of being this monster. The video, they beat the shit out of him. And it's just
wrecked him out bad. I watched it too. And
yeah.
He's all dazed and barely. I think he's unconscious at some point.
He blacked out 4 times. From what I recall, he told me he blacked out 4 times, and it's just like I look back on that day, and it's just like the worst things people did never warranted more than a year. I would think even a year in jail or prison, and in reality, most of us from the beginning, the supposedly most egregious, monsters during that shock and awe campaign, we were the victims. The cops, they fucked us up, and we were portrayed as people trying to topple the government. And so I want to go from this point on. I've seen, the CCTV doesn't lie. You need help to get up the stairs or go down the stairs. You're limping. They hit you. You leave. What's the day like from that point on? And actually, if you could, you went there. I think you went there with a certain fellow who turned out to be, I guess you could call him a fucking rat. What was it like from that point on? Because from that point until your arrest, what was going through your head? Clearly, our perception of what happened that day did not match the perception of the public or the way it was reported after the fact. So take us from that point on. What goes on?
Well, yeah, the funny thing was like after I got shot and sprayed and all that stuff, and I was able to get down there and start moving again and get back to the hotel. And literally as soon as I could actually see where I was going after the pepper spray in my face, I did not decide to go, I'm going to go in the Capitol. No, I said, no, I'm going back to the hotel because this shit fucking hurts. It's horrible, and I'm not a fan, and looks like everything's a little exciting, and I don't, I'm good. I think I'll go back and rinse this shit off.
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan of that shit. It's hot. And so I go back and get to the hotel, and I'm laying there for a while, and I got in the shower. I had time to take a shower. I had time to go to 7-Eleven, get some milk, put it on a rag, put it on my face, and I'm watching the TV and watching the news. And it's a while before this guy that I was with, Rocky, shows up to the hotel. And he takes pictures of where I got shot, and I told him, I said, yeah, and I'm kind of, I'm excited about the whole thing because I'm thinking I didn't really do anything wrong. I stood up, I got assaulted, I got shot and sprayed, and I left. I thought, there's nothing I did wrong. I've seen protests, and I've seen people not get arrested for way bad shit, So I'm thinking, okay, stand up and do all that shit and leave. That's fine. So I got no fears. What am I supposed to fear? I mean, I already explained what I did and didn't do, and clearly what you can see in the video, if anybody ever watched it, knows. And then, so I get back there, bullshit with him for a little bit, leave D.C. the next morning, and drive home. And, we're driving down the road, we're talking trash and everything, just laughing and like, wow, I can't believe all that shit happened. It was quite an exciting day. And we get back to the house, and once we arrive, then walk in the house. I think I got there on the 8th. And, of course, on the 6th, my kids are like, hey, what's going on? You're up there in D.C., it looks pretty crazy. What's up? And I'm like saying, stuff to them on the message and everything. Well, my son, he finds out I'm there. But then when I arrive on the 8th back at my house, he's at the house. And he's, because he lives there, but he's, normally at his girlfriend's house about that time. And he's at the house for sure. And he starts recording us whenever when I walk in. And then he just, for some reason, he decided to record me while I'm drinking and I'm talking trash and trying to watch the videos and stuff like that I had. And then he had those recordings, but then on the 10th, he decided he would gaslight me about some shit about his political ideology. And I asked him, I said, I don't understand, Jackson, what is your political ideology? And he said, well, I'm a communist, and I think America should be a communist country. And I talking stupid shit to him, and I'm like, that's the dumbest shit I ever heard. And I said, and I'm thinking political ideology, and I say what I said, and he runs to the feds and says that I threatened him. And I'm like, that's not how that worked out. That's not what that conversation was about. And then, and that got used against me. And then it turns out later that I think I was on the 10th, and then they arrested me on the 16th. And he had come to find out later he had taken those recordings from when I arrived back from D.C. on the 8th. He handed them over to the feds. He handed over text messages, and he handed over pictures they had taken in my safe to show my firearms to the agent, and that I owned firearms legally, to be fair. And then he decided he'd work with the federal government to incarcerate me and testify against me in trial and lie just like they wanted him to. So he became one of their little tools, and the federal agents groomed my son to make sure that he could work with them to try to do everything he could to incarcerate me.
This is it's a delicate topic, so I don't want to ask this the wrong way, but I feel like it's an important part of your case. Do you think, when you said that they groomed your son, do you think it's possible that he was planning before January 6th to set you up? Like maybe Rocky, I know Rocky, he had gotten immunity to testify against you. Do you think that he just, on spur of the moment sort of thing, because of his ideology, do you think that's what led to him turning on you because of an ideological, let's say, woke mind virus, as people call it? But do you think his
Trump derangement syndrome? All that's applicable.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I found, I got turned in by my roommate, and I lived with him for 3 years. I considered him a good friend, and I find, excuse me, it's very common. A lot of us were turned in by, in your case, family. For me, a friend, roommates. People got turned in by neighbors, coworkers, and it just seems. I was very worried. This is kind of a tangent. I was always worried that by the time I got out, there wouldn't be a country left to come back to, because America became so partisan and so divided that there just wouldn't be a country, because we were at the point where everybody hated each other, nobody could coexist, and that we were just so divided that people were willing to turn in the people who loved them over petty ideological reasons. And it's kind of a tangent, but it's like it worries me. I think we're better now, and I hope that this never repeats, and I hope that the temperature's cool. But one thing that always was in the back of my head was, to what extent did people turn others in? Because Pete Schwartz, he was turned in by his coworker that he drove to work every day. You had people turned in by strangers. You had some people turn in with facial recognition and different means, but it just, one of the things that is always in the back of my head is, to what extent did people who turned others in plan to turn them in, versus were, maybe the word groomed is more appropriate. It turned out in my case, my roommate was originally, it seemed the NCI, basically the feds had said that my roommate reached out to NCIS before wearing the wire, that he had reached out to them to alert them to me being at the Capitol. And then it turned out none of that was fucking true. NCIS came to my house looking for me, and they found my roommate on a completely different date than they originally said. And so, there's always the question in my head, to what extent were some of us maybe being watched before January 6th? And so, there are all these little red flags. And so again, I know the conspiracy thing isn't always helpful, but I'm wondering, do you think maybe you were being watched before J6, or to what extent do you think, your son, if you're comfortable talking about it, to what extent do you think that he was coordinating maybe with the feds to set you up?
Well, the funny thing about the conspiracy theories, and I don't really like to go down those kind of rabbit holes, but they all seem to be coming true.
That's the thing.
Put that little caveat out before we go from here, as they all seem to be coming right back around and kicking them right in the damn ass. Thank God for that. But it's just, it's really hard to say. I mean, with the whole Rocky thing, and my son thing, those variables are hard to argue differently than what they appear to be. I mean, Rocky appears to have been always involved with what was about to happen. Here's something I have never really told anybody much, is that right before January 6th, Rocky had asked me to meet him halfway between Round Rock, which is near Austin, and where I lived in North Dallas. And he wanted to just talk. And he was very synonymous, very prominent, outspoken person in ways that during the Texas 3%er conversations on Telegram, people were like, man, you need to stop talking like that, bro. And I kept telling him, Rocky, bro, you need to quit talking like that, bro. It's crazy, bro. You're getting way out there. You're off the rails with that. And he wanted to meet me at a park, and without electronics. And so it was at a lake somewhere, and I can't remember where it was. And it was literally just him trying to gaslight me into saying stuff about Nancy Pelosi and shit like that. And I thought, when it was over with, and I didn't fall into it. And I literally kept saying, bro, you need to quit talking like that. That's just not good. And I didn't feed into it. And it was very uncomfortable that he did that. And I thought, well, he's a very passionate person about how he feels about stuff like that. And then I headed back to the house, and my wife asked me, she said, what was that about? How'd that go? And I said, it was just some weird Rocky shit. I don't know. And so that seemed like a setup before January 6th. And my son had contacted the federal, the FBI hot tip line, Christmas Eve, I think it was. which is nearly 2 weeks before January 6th, to tell them that, hey, my dad's talking about going to January 6th thing that Trump has announced and something big's going to happen. Well, how the fuck would he know? Because I didn't know. How would he know anything? So why is he saying something big's going to happen and then something big happens and I'm actually going and show up? I had no fucking idea that was going to happen. That was a big shock to, I think, everybody. You think that that's the most powerful, most protected building in our country, or at least all of this district is supposed to be, especially certain places like the White House and the Capitol. And knowing that we were all coming and the intel was showing that we were coming, why did you leave 5 officers to protect that whole property right there at Peace Circle? 5 officers. And that's a setup. And you can argue however you want, but that's not how it works for me. It's pretty clear that they did that on, that you take the guardrails off and people show up, you're going to have a little bit of an issue, especially if you stick instigators and provocateurs inside the crowd. You're going to have even more problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do believe that my son was long before all of it got started. I think that he was somewhat tied in somehow, maybe not directly, but in his woke ideology, I do believe that he was somehow snagged into that shit. And Rocky, I think, was already involved. I think that I still have questions about whether he's a federal agent of some 3-letter agency, whichever one, I don't know. But I hope one day our wonderful new administration will find out and let us know, and I would like us to clean out the swamp and do something about the enemies within this country.
You'd mentioned the paltry amount of officers guarding the initial breach site perimeter. And you'd use the word setup, which, again, we had kind of alluded to that earlier with the MPD officers saying that they themselves were set up. Do you think, and again, this is to an extent it's theory. I know that there was the recent report that talked about CHSs being there, but not taking, any responsibility for setting anything up. Do you think that the events of that day were coordinated? Like, to what extent, if so? Like, because obviously you arrived after the initial breaches of the perimeter. I did. Thousands of us poured into the area. To what extent do you think they were expecting that?
Well, I think that there's no way in hell they weren't expecting it. They knew we were coming. They knew there was going to be a large group of people. They knew it was going to be significant enough to where they should have put, extra guardrails in place. There's no doubt in my mind that Nancy Pelosi and Paul Irving, the House Sergeant at Arms, they chose not to do that. And the only reason you would do that is to, I guess the word's contrive what they got done. And then they kept the narrative of the insurrection. I mean, insurrection is not what happened. And they use it as if they use the word as so broadly as if it was a real insurrection. And it was not. I mean, I don't know why. And I look at the laws and I read the Ballantyne's Law Dictionary, which is the one that all judges and lawyers use along with Black Law's Dictionary. But the Ballantyne's Law Dictionary says that an insurrection is more than a mob or a riot. Now, the problem that they're having with pushing the insurrection narrative, in my mind, in logical sense, is because they wanted it to be an insurrection and it wasn't. Right. They wanted everybody to start shooting at each other, and that never happened. And so because it didn't, they felt that they could continue to push a narrative that never happened, even though, I mean, if there would have been a bunch of firing back and forth, like what you would consider a real insurrection to look like, then they could have actually said, yeah, that was an insurrection, but that never happened. The only firing that went on that day was Michael Byrd, U.S. Capitol Police officer, shooting and murdering Ashley Babbitt. And that is not an insurrection. That's a fucking murder.
Yeah. More so, even that. There's a couple things I could say to that, too. Well, first, as like a history major, I think of insurrections or rebellions. It was funny. When I was in prison, I was rereading a lot of, biographies of the founders, and read John Adams, Hamilton. And, it's interesting because, like, I think of Adams when he pardoned, I believe it was with Frey's rebellion. He made the observation that the supposed insurrectionists in that rebellion weren't insurrectionists. They weren't involved in an insurrection at all. He called it a riot, and he pardoned them because he thought the law was misapplied, that it was actually just a riot, not a true rebellion. And he observed that those who were rioting were being taken advantage of by powerful, influential people behind the scenes. And that he described them as miserable Germans who were as ignorant of the laws as they were of the language.
Wow, deja vu.
Right, but so
as ignorant as the Germans all of a sudden.
Right, and so like that's an example to me of how the word matters, and normally like nobody likes pedantry, but you need to be pedantic sometimes with the law. Especially with the law, and so like that's an example of showing there is absolutely a distinction between a riot and an insurrection, which is really an armed rebellion. And so I think of like, when I think of an insurrection for real, I think of like the Civil War, or I think of the Philippine insurrection after the Spanish-American War, where we had to put down revolts from the Filipinos who wanted independence. That went on for years. Hundreds of thousands died. But another thing I would say too, you had mentioned
the Insurrection Act comes from literally the Civil War, the Confederacy insurrection, where they actually went in and they went with guns, and it was an internal microcosm of wars and battles within different areas. And those were insurrectionists. Those were considered an actual small war within our own system and factions that run. And that's different than what happened on January 6th. Completely different.
Yeah. 800,000 people died in the American Civil War. The only people who died on January 6th were the protesters. And you had mentioned Byrd. I'll say this as well. A lot has come out since you went to prison, but I'm sure you heard of a man named John Banuelos. They call him the cowpoke. He was picked up 3 years after J6. He fired a gun into the air, didn't fire at a cop, but it's interesting, and I'm not saying this proves anything, but you get 7 years for, among various false claims, the gun thing, which was never brandished or proven to even exist. But a guy who fires a gun into the air, they ignore him for 3 years, despite the you got to think about this from a propaganda perspective. You're calling this not just an insurrection, it's a deadly armed insurrection. And the one guy who definitively can be shown on video firing a gun is ignored for 3 years. And then it turns out he was known to law enforcement for 3 years because he was involved in a stabbing murder out in Utah. He doesn't get picked up, and they don't seem to care.
Heard about that, yeah.
Yeah, and then another interesting thing, and this is what always stood out to me about how your case was treated versus others. There was another gentleman who did have a gun, and it was in a holster, and it was actually, I don't know if you remember in the jail, Jeff McKellop would focus on this video, it was in his discovery on the MPD video. The cop's like, gun! And he picks up a gun off the floor, and it's in like this We the People holster. It looks like a custom holster, maybe. And it's just like, well, where the fuck did that gun come from? And it belonged to a guy who got charged, and the guy ended up getting probation. And it's like, well, that's interesting. That might, like, we can't prove that was brandished, but McKellop would call that a drop gun. He would say that's what we would do overseas because he was a CIA contractor, and so
there's literally a video of the guy whose gun it was saying, "That's my gun."
Right.
And I don't know that they showed that within his sentencing and things, but whether it was brandished or not, it was still his gun. He claimed it was his gun, and
He got
That's
probation. And
he got
meanwhile,
probation.
but again, it's just like, I only bring this up, not even because I think it's that bad or that it's proof of anything. It's just the narrative of the insurrection, the armed insurrection, it doesn't comport to reality. And so that, when I look at how it was prosecuted versus how it was narrated, I have to think that there was more going on behind the scenes in terms of why they said the things they said. And that, to me, also, again, this is theory, but to me, it looks more planned and coordinated and maybe even choreographed to some extent.
Here's an interesting thought that has gone through my head a myriad times, is that, let's just say, for posterity's sake, I guess, is that they actually didn't bring the National Guard in. They were aware, perhaps, that there were going to be a vast, a large number of firearms in the area on the protesters' side, and they literally wanted everyone to shoot at each other, and so they could call it an actual insurrection.
Right.
And they allowed that to happen on purpose. What does that make you feel in your gut, America? That's actually a possibility, is that they literally were trying to get protesters and officers to shoot at each other so that people would die on large amounts of American blood would be spilled all over the Capitol ground. And they took the guardrails off, perhaps to actually facilitate such an action. How does that make you feel in your gut, people? To think about how these sick motherfuckers tried to get a bunch of Americans killed on American soil, and these sick people could very well be just as guilty as what I just implied.
And I think it's very, again, this is me, I think there's enough, maybe it's not even anecdote, I think there's enough evidence in terms of, well, I'll say there's enough circumstantial evidence, I think, to point in that direction. Whether it was the excessive force from police, now granted, I think a lot of the officers that day were incompetent. I think a lot of them were incompetent, poorly trained. But I do think that there were elements like was it Tao? There are people who act so erratic, you have to wonder, is this just because they're losing their minds? Or is this because they truly do want to incite the crowd to riot more? There was one video where they even admitted to each other, for every one we hit, we piss off 10 more.
Yeah, that was Tao.
Yeah.
What an idiot. Daniel Tao, what an idiot.
Literally,
oh my God.
The biggest,
I think he literally was trying to get us all killed.
Biggest asshole of that day. Tao is the fucking one of the worst motherfuckers from that day. That dude should have been prosecuted. But, well, I mean, a lot of them should have put, so you have that. You have weapons mysteriously appearing on the ground. Oops. You have someone climbing a scaffold, shooting in the air, and then, I don't know why. And then you have the cops.
He's the same guy you and I looked at on that video.
He is.
The cowboy hat on that showed the gun to the camera.
Right. For what?
Pulled his shirt up, and it's like, there's two. I just kept going. It just kept going, man.
It was
weird. The whole thing just doesn't, it reeks so bad of it. Stupid insanity.
And I could be wrong. If something comes out and it shows I'm completely fucking wrong, I'll apologize to that guy personally. But I remember the video, like you said, it was what was that video? It was like the Vice News video, and he's covering his face with a shirt, and he pulls up his own shirt, and it shows the gun in the thing. And I remember I had the MPD video, and it showed him, he had a backpack on under his coat. It looked like he had a hunchback. I'm like, what the fuck is this? What am I watching? It was just bizarre. Anyway, but there's just so much shit that when, we watched thousands of hours of video, probably.
Thousands. You and me went through thousands of hours of video.
And after a while, it's just like, you can't stop not seeing shit. Because in every video you watch it again, you see something new you didn't see before. And again, I don't want this to be confirmation bias. I'm not trying to go on a tangent, like down a spiral into conspiracy land, but like, it really seems like there's a lot of weird shit happening, and I didn't notice it at the time because I was fucked up as it was. Like that day, I had gone days without sleeping. I was fueled by energy drinks, and I was full of adrenaline from getting shot at and sprayed. But like after the fact, when I look back and watch that stuff, I'm like, wow, that shit was going on all around me. I didn't notice that guy there doing the weird shit. Remember I found that guy by the bike racks. He called himself Eric. He said he was going to plant roadside bombs. And like, I never saw that shit. But I look back, I'm like, was he the pipe? Was he the pipe bomber? You know, like, I don't fucking know.
Remember the guy inside the rotunda? And he's yelling, what do you say? I got a pound of meth buried in...
No, I have bodies. He said he had bodies in his... Yes. Bro.
Bodies. He's yelling it in a megaphone in the rotunda.
For no reason. For no fucking reason.
Yeah. Well, for a reason we don't know the answer to yet. But here we go again. You know?
Yeah.
You and I watch so much video, and it's like, what the fuck is happening?
I completely forgot about that until you just said that. I've got bodies in my face. I'm like, what the fuck?
2 bodies. I think he said 2 bodies buried in the backyard and a pound of meth buried in the school down the road. Some shit like that. I was like, what the fuck is happening?
Yes.
Crisis actors everywhere.
I noticed
everywhere.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, it's not even a theory. And again, that doesn't mean every single person suspected was that, but like, because they're fucking weird. People are weird, you know. But like, when I look, especially along that initial bike rack, like the roadside bomber guy, I look at a lot of these people, and they're just, you could tell they're just straight up actors. Like there was that one guy, I called him Stolen Valor Douche. He was wearing, he had like these dog tags out, just hanging out on top of his shirt, and he was just randomly saluting the cops for like 5 minutes straight. It was clearly just like, this dude's just an asshole. Like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Why is he there doing that? It was very weird. It's just performative. It's very performative. Yeah. And
for what reason? Well, I mean, what is the reasoning behind it? I don't know, but then that happened so much when when you and I were watching the videos and we went through so many, and then we would compare notes. We're like, did you see this one? Did you see that one?
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on?
Right.
And there was so much of that, and it doesn't matter how many people say, oh, well, you know, you guys are, you know, conspiracy theorists and that shit. It's like, you know what? I would say that if it was just the first 5, we probably seen 1,000.
And well, even just, you know, being as generous as possible, like just mathematically, even if like a tenth of what we suspected was legit, that's fucking a lot. That's a lot of shit.
That's too much. That's way too much.
Right.
That's a huge percentage when you think about it, you know, per capita, of the amount of things that went on. It's just, no, it's not good. And it's hard. You can't sit there and say, oh, well, you know, this may have happened and this is why there's things like this. Okay, so I'll give you 10 of those cases. What are you going to do about the other ones? You're going to tell me about the other ones.
Yeah, for every... we'll only for every 20 bodies and 10 bags of meth, we'll count that. Fucking. So
it should be all right.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's not going to be okay.
It's never going to be.
We need the Nuremberg trials. We need to get these people that were sitting there of power acting the way they did and doing the things that they tried to get done. And we need to find out what they were up to. And they need to be put on trial.
I know nothing.
Yeah. I know nothing.
So,
yeah.
Disavow. I especially disavow, and I disavow you disavowing, and I disavow that too. So, take me through, so you get, let's just call it you get set up, you get entrapped, and, they try to incriminate you, and, you get set up, you get picked up. They come get you. You get arrested. When do you get arrested? And take me through the process after that. Of we typically call it diesel therapy. So obviously you didn't go straight to the DC jail. So if you could, take me from the time you're arrested to the time you get to DC. And I think I recall you were in Grady County. Like what happened after you're arrested? Where do you go? Where do the marshals take you? Where do you end up throughout the country?
Yeah, so the federal agent, he gets me in the car, and I asked him, I said, well, what is it you even raided my house about? And he folds up the warrant, sticks it in my pocket, and says, misdemeanor trespass. So then he drives me over to Fannin County Jail in Bonham, Texas, and drops me off there. I get in there. They don't give me my medication that I've been taking for 12 years, and get in there. I sit in there for about 20. I think it was 20, 21 days. Run into Troy Smocks while I'm in there. Another J6er. He got picked up the day before me. Sitting there, and I got picked up on the 16th, so it was 10 days after January 6th. I'm in there on the 22nd, I think it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. I have a seizure because they didn't give me my medication, and I ended up in an ICU. I came to the next day in ICU. I spent 4 days in ICU because they damn near killed me in that fucking jail. And then get back to the jail. All until I was in there about 21 days. And I go to, after that, they take me, after the COVID, you had to do the whole 2-week COVID thing, and then you had to do some more time or whatever there. Then I go to Shady Grady County, Oklahoma, and I'm stuck there for 31 days, I think it was. It was over 30 days. Stuck there because of all the ice storms in 2021. It froze all the way down to Mexico and snowed. So I spent over a month in Shady Grady. Ran into Michael Foy there, another J6er, and Christopher Grider and Daniel Adams. Ran into all of them in there. And some of those got released. I think Daniel Adams got moved to D.C. jail. Christopher Grider got released. But anyway, they did a month there and then got up to D.C. jail. And I spent the whole night. I spent 19 months in D.C. jail up there with my good friend Tim.
When you
and a few other good people, but not all.
That's a very generous description.
I like to try to keep it on the nicer side of life.
You're a mensch. Fucking. Now let me ask you: when you get to DC, and when I got there, I had to quarantine, but I didn't quarantine in C2A. I quarantined in a medical unit, and I think it's because I think they gave me a false positive. And you remember that Chomo, Michael Lanham, the skinny white kid that.
Yep. Oh, I do. I remember him. I don't forget that situation.
Yeah. So he arrived with me. It was me, Lang, Curgio, and 2 Chomos. He was one of the Chomos that we came from Northern Neck. They bring us in. They test us for COVID after they just tested us at Northern Neck, and suddenly now I have COVID even though I didn't in Northern Neck. I'm like, what the fuck? So they put me and Lanham in this medical quarantine unit. And it's very weird. And then I think 10 days go by. They take me to Gen Pop, and he's my cellmate in this protective custody cell, even though we're in Gen Pop. I'm like, why am I in protective custody when I'm in Gen Pop? And why is this Chomo my cellmate? I'm like, okay, this makes no sense. I don't know if he was like a rat. I don't know. I think he ended up getting like 30 years because he was a repeat offender. But that was weird. They finally bring me. I was only in there for like maybe a day and a half, and then they moved me to C2B directly. I got there February 3rd, and then I get moved around, and then I end up in C2B. Lanham actually followed me a couple days later. That was weird too. He said that, I'm supposed to go with him, the lieutenant said, and the jail just put him in there. And I'm like, that's normal. The jail you just told the jail what they're supposed to do, and then they just then they just do it. Okay. Well then, okay, sure. But
Which happens for no one ever.
Yeah. So very fucking weird. But so did you go to C2A before you came to C2B?
Yeah, I did. I spent 2 weeks over there before they popped the door in between the two pods and let us move into C2B. But yeah, I spent 2 weeks over there.
Okay. Yeah. So do you remember what day you finally came to C2B, roughly?
Let's see. I arrived at, I think it was March 8th. I got to C2A. So it would have been The 15th, I think it was March 15th.
Mm.
I could tell you, I have my journal. But
Well, do you? So here's the thing. Like I've actually heard, and it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I like different perspectives on this because I was never in A, except for a couple times. I think in 2022 they would walk us through there to go to rec, to go to outside, and it was a dump. So let me ask you, like, was A worse than B when you were there?
I thought it was a weird because of the colors. I'm gonna go with the way it was painted. It did seem like it was a different. Didn't seem like it was as cleaner as. No, I'm not gonna say clean. Clean's probably the worst word to use. It was the colors. Like in C2A, the handrails and the doors were painted dark blue, but in C2B they were painted a light gray. And I know that seems very, minuscule in the whole aspect of being imprisoned, but it changes the way things look. I think, in my mind, I think it's a psychological game for me. But yeah,
So that's you. You really didn't. I mean, it wasn't in terms of privileges. It wasn't any better, right? You were probably still in solitary the whole time, pretty much.
Oh yeah. No, I was. So when I got in there, I was locked down for. I think it was 2 days before I even was released out to just make a call for the. I think we were only allowed out 30 minutes, maybe an hour. It was definitely not more than an hour.
So it wasn't even 23-1 at that point. It was you had to go 2 days per.
Yeah. No, it was 24 hours for the first 2 days.
Yeah. That's interesting. So so that happens, and then eventually, I noticed like the different waves, they kind of funnel into C2B over time. But you were one of the first people that I remember from the original, let's say, first few waves. And so like you came in at a time when there was still no top tier. Everybody was still on bottom tier. So you came in the middle of March. And so, I mean, for those who, and again, it's becoming like a meme at this point. I just keep saying this every time I talk to someone. I know the answer to this, and I know you know the answer to this, and everybody who was there knows the answer. But for those who haven't heard, could you give a description of what life was like initially in C2B? What were the living conditions there?
Oh no, it was horrible. It was nasty. Everything was dirty. The showers were disgusting. I mean, it was definitely not what I was expecting in life, but the food was horrible, and we were just, it was bad. I'm really OCD, and I'm a clean person. So when I got in there, I was mortified, and there was hair everywhere. Stuff on the walls, mold. It was, let's see, we were there in March, so it was still cold, if I remember right. And so there was like, I don't know, the walls were slimy because the exterior wall was always wet and it was slimy. But it was a pretty nasty place.
Yeah. Yeah, to quote, I love doing this. Every interview I do, I have to quote Jeff McKellum. Shit, piss, jizz, snot, man spray.
Smack my man spray everywhere. It was bad. It was pretty bad. I mean,
shit and like feces and human hair clumps like jammed into corners.
It took a significant amount of time just to try to clean up the inside of just the cell I was in because it was just so nasty.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me too. Now, granted, we were in administrative segregation largely against our will, but at the same time, the names kind of like it's a little on the nose. Instead of central detention facility, we were in central treatment facility. And when I think of like the shit and snot and hair and everything jammed in all these places, it was basically an insane asylum. We were basically in a nut house, basically, and it's that's
literally what the CTF side was built for was those with mental dispositions. Then they were separated from the CDF side so that they could get treatment. That's central treatment facility meant it was a medical facility on that side, where the other side was an actual detention facility for inmates of incarceration. So yeah, these people that were there before us were mentally ill, and so there was stuff everywhere, and it was nasty.
Yeah. And now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, I know, let's say half a dozen people at least who will corroborate this. Did you hear when you were in there from the guards that they had actually cleared that wing out for us before January 6th, essentially expecting our presence?
Yes, that was what we were told. Yes, we were told that by several guards that they kept saying, "Well, no, this place was literally set up just for you guys."
Hmm. Yeah, it kind of looks pre-planned, but I don't want to be controversial.
Oh yeah. Well, again, we're back to the whole. Well, that's interesting. How did that plan out so well?
Ooh.
I know. It's like there's no conspiracies, but there's no coincidences either.
Yeah. So it was a dump. It was a condemned building. They tried to, occasionally they would, try to, make it spick and span. I remember they would paint. Remember when there would be inspections, they would try to paint over the rust and the mold. But in general, what was your life like in there? Ignoring the obviously decrepit nature of the facility itself, what was your diet like? What was your time outside of your cell like whenever you got it? What was time like inside your cell as well? Like, what was it actually like to live in that shithole?
Well, see, for me, and I know this is going to be different from most, but and I attribute this to my career.
Yeah.
Being in the oil field, I've lived in some of the most atrocious conditions you've ever seen trying to make a living. We would live on location. We would have a small trailer, and we would have a very small, compact area we would live in, and sometimes it was not the greatest. And even living on an offshore rig out in the middle of the water, it's like living in an Alcatraz system with a small living quarters and in a big, large metal can out in the place where I can't leave. So I kind of looked at my incarceration in that context. It didn't take and burden my mind as much as other people because they had never lived in those kind of conditions.
That's true.
I have to admit that I did, and I have for nearly all of my career. So, as nasty as it was, as long as I cleaned it up, I could do it, and as long as I could have a little bit of time outside the cell, the more time, the better. It was rough, the whole 23 and 1 all the time, and then it got to 22 and 2, and that was better. I liked getting the social aspect of getting to know everybody. One of the most important things that I wanted to do when I could get out of my cell was go to each cell and get to meet each Jan 6, and because honestly, you guys were all kind of a big deal to me. You still kind of are. You're all kind of a big deal.
Oh, shucks.
And so I wanted to get to know everybody and I felt compelled to get as much information as I could from everybody so that I could compile all of that information and try to get that out to my wife and see what she could do with it. And she managed to get it out to some very wonderful people that utilized it quite well. And I'm grateful that all that worked out because, man, the network is huge. But I wanted to get the chance to get to know everybody. That was one of my favorite aspects of the whole thing, was getting to know all the new guys, all the Jan 6ers that had come in and see if I could hear about their stories and see if they saw and heard the same things I did during that day. And did they feel just as much energy that day as I did? There was so much electric energy on that day.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. It's like I mean, honestly, I'm an introvert, but I've always felt like a sense of duty to other people. And so before J6,
Yes.
I was a union rep. And so I, I just like, it's just interesting. I felt like I kind of became a union rep, or at least I wanted to be when I was in the jail. So I was always going to other people, seeing what their problems were, or
Yeah.
and again, when you're powerless, you know, you don't have really the means of doing anything or solving problems for others. But I remember one thing I loved to do was just fucking bullshit with people and try to make them laugh because it was miserable in there. And
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things, you know, to get through all that, yeah, it was a strong mind, but I think humor was especially important. So I
Oh,
enjoyed,
absolutely.
you know, the
Absolutely.
camaraderie and a good sense of humor went a very long way. You know, so it was always fun to, you know, bullshit with you and others in there, for the little time that we had. And then I think, unfortunately, I think as we got more time out of ourselves, it got a little less fun because of
Yeah. Well,
certain shitbags. I'll just say shitbags, but it was,
all the dynamics of the personalities is like, you know what? I think I'll just go back to my cell now. What the hell?
yeah,
What do I run into? I
yeah.
liked it better when everybody would, like, whenever I would be out and other people would be behind the door. They're a captive audience. You know, I'm just saying that out loud. And you didn't have to worry about it. You know, it's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, you're a shitbag going down the road now. Hey, what are you doing, Tim? Oh yeah, see, I can hang out with this dude. He's got good. He's got jokes.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you said captive audience. I remember Carl would always come up to my cell when I was locked in because he was top tier. I was bottom tier, and he would come up to my cell and he would just fucking start punching my window and banging on my door, and he would get yelled at by the guard, but he would just act like what I didn't do anything. It was just
He's like,
funny.
why?
Everybody had like their own little unique, you know, their own little their interesting way of
Personalities and their ways, yeah. And you know what?
communicating. You know, their
There's
hellos.
some that didn't.
Well, yeah, but you know, that's I'm not telling any tales out of school here. You know, yeah,
Not today.
but yeah, it was goddamn yeah. The when I think of like the camaraderie, that was like a big deal in the beginning. You know, I remember, and you took some when you know you mentioned you know collecting information. That was a big part of it back then. I remember you know getting everybody's you know families together, getting their contact info. You kept really good records in terms of like the chronological order of people showing up. You know, like
Yeah.
we. Here's a fucked up thing too, and it's I've saved so much, and I was just talking to Jessica about this. I saved so much. One because, yeah, admittedly, I'm a slob and a pack rat, but I'm also like a big history guy. I was a history major, and I know how important primary sources are. But even more than that, I knew if I told people half the shit that went on in there, nobody would fucking believe me. You know, like, there's so much shit happened, no one would believe it if there wasn't proof. And whether it was the grievances we filed or the notes we took, we've saved so much information that would have otherwise been lost to history if it wasn't us, because we were a unique brand. You know, like I don't think there's ever been a group of indignant assholes as we were in C2B. Like the amount of grievances we filed, all that shit, they couldn't handle
We
that.
broke it. We used their system against them. That was the funniest thing.
They couldn't handle it.
They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it because they'd never seen so many people work in such solidarity.
Absolutely. You know, I remember, you know, it was like, what was the grievance process was like some stupid 4-step system. We broke them so much they got rid of the 4th step just so like we couldn't complete it. They got rid of it.
Yeah, and then they just kept. Then they got to where they took the entire electronic grievance off the tablets and wouldn't give us any paper grievances anymore to write.
Right.
They were like, no, we got to the only way to stop this is to stop giving them the option.
Yeah. Yeah. It was and the marshals would come, and they typically wouldn't do anything, but we occasionally had some wins there. I remember that senior, I think it was a senior chief from there. He came and we were complaining to him. He was like, "Whoa, why don't you get your grievances and keep your records, whatever?" And we're like, "Well, we don't have them. They won't give them to us." I remember there was one time he went and he actually got physical copies of all the grievances that were filed. It was a shitload. I was like, "Oh, it was that easy, was it?" You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about that?
My God.
How about that? When you want something, you can get it. If you don't want it, clearly you're going to get it.
Yeah. How about that? If the jail doesn't stonewall you, you actually have a shot. What? Let me ask you this. In terms of there was a camaraderie, there's the interactions with others. But like a typical day, a typical week, what was your schedule, if for lack of a better term, inside the DC jail? Like going outside, going to the gym, going to church. Like what was actually available to inmates in the gulag? What was what was the actual situation there?
What are you talking about when we first got there?
I mean, really the whole thing. I mean, obviously, yeah, like we just mentioned, like the rec was basically non-existent at the beginning. We got a little more leeway after that. And then after that, like after a certain point, we kind of like snuck out most of the day. But, like what would an average, like tell you like an average American, like what could they expect if they were in the gulag from start to finish?
Well, the average person in America wouldn't have got it treated the way we did. That's for sure.
Well, yeah.
Know that. I know that whenever when we were there, we were for the longest. I think we actually didn't get a significant amount of time out of our cell until sometime in April. But once we did, then it would be tier management, and sometimes that would be chaotic. But it was. I mean, when I got out, the good thing was I could get out. I could hang out and talk to people. I could sit and play Magic the Gathering with Jessica, and I always just stayed out of the way and just kind of enjoyed just kind of every so often touching, interacting with people every so often. But as far as half the other things that went on, I mean, that was really all there was to do. I mean, I really wasn't somebody. I spent most of my time on phone calls and trying to get a hold of, talking to my family and stuff like that. That was my biggest goal every day, was to spend as much interaction as I could with my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
But as far as the end of the pod, inside the pod, the thing I hated about not being in the cell area was the acoustics in that building was a horrible situation. The roof was like a waffle cup. It's like a waffle.
Yeah.
So all the noise was it was insane. You could be loud noise on one end and it'd drive you crazy on the other end because of the way that it would bounce around in there.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I have no idea why they built that place that way, unless they were intentionally trying to make people crazy.
I think, well, I mean, that's an option. I think more than likely it was, at least from the period when it was a madhouse, probably just so they could hear, like nothing would go unnoticed. I would imagine someone was maybe like seizing out. You would hear it on the other side maybe, but that was obnoxious. It was like, there was just always like not even an echo. It was almost like there was a constant vibration in your ear. It was never like just stillness like that. And that's why it was so important to have that stupid little TV room. You could drag the phone in. So you're not hearing everything around you. That was obnoxious. There were the interactions with others when you had the ability. But let me ask you.
I think that's why I spent most of my time. I liked just sitting there in a chair with my door open on my cell. That way I didn't feel locked into my cell.
Yeah.
But I could actually still interact. People would walk by and they would say hi. And, that way it wasn't me encroaching in on them. They would just come talk to me. I just rather, to me, that was the easier way to do it for me.
Yeah.
Some people would be constant moving around and stuff like that. It was always too much going on. I'm too old for that shit.
Yeah. Plus, a door open if they didn't bitch at you about it, which was like hit or miss. I know that was also a good way to like regulate the temperature in your room, because I remember like it would either be baking hot or it'd be freezing cold. The whole system there was just garbage. Speaking of getting yelled at for having your door open or something like that, let's talk about the guards.
Yeah. Oh goodness.
Everybody had different experiences. Sometimes temperament played a bit into it. Sometimes not just of the inmates, but of the guards. Some guards were very, I think, sympathetic to us, but then I think a lot of them were just kind of like very weary of us. I think a lot of them took January 6th very personally because they were locals and they took it out on us. But then I think also I think a lot of them were directed to shit on us by the upper brass in the jail. I'm not sure what the ratio is. I don't know what your opinion is on that. But if you could, like, for those who weren't there, like, what was the situation with the guards on a daily basis? Like, what was it like to deal with them?
There was, you say on a daily basis, like a daily basis wasn't something that was arbitrary half the time.
Yeah.
Because in reality, everything could be, Cadillacing along and there's really no problems. And then just out of nowhere, there would be somebody from the higher, in a white shirt that would show up. And then all of a sudden chaos would ensue. And it was just, the guards would just start just fucking with us. And it's like, just to stir us up. It's like they'd come in and shake the ant farm. Oh, these people are not being the insurrectionists that they say they are. We've got to go piss them off. Cause some trouble. Let's go, let's go stir them up. Let's drag this metal thing down the wall while they're trying to sleep and piss them off. And that didn't go well for them because, man, we could get loud. We could get real loud.
Yeah, one of the funniest things in there. Well, everybody would do they would just make a lot of noise because it was really you couldn't retaliate physically. Otherwise, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. But a lot of people would bang on their doors and stuff like that. But what the funniest thing to me was when, and I don't know, I think maybe it was McHugh. I don't know, but someone would just randomly start doing like Native American chants, like, oh, I was like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? But it was funny. It was funny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was great. Because when we were locked in our cells, there was so much fun that would go out of the doors, and you could be on completely one end of the pod, but there was this communication all the way across to the other side, and then everybody would start interacting with their little fun thing that they would add to it, and that was always a great time.
Yeah. And what's funny too is like even when we were locked down, there was still communication. It's like the vent talks were always an option for those who were connected to someone else, or just yelling, like you just said, yelling shit out the door. There was, oh my God, Carl would yell, bye bye, or, bye bye. Was it, what did Cash used to say? Then he was like, you want to join our band, dude? Or stuff like that. Just ridiculous. Like, it was an insane asylum, I guess, in a sense. Like, everybody was just yelling random
just
shit.
Like we were crazy for sure.
Oh, Billy. It was just...
Oh, Alex, yeah.
Yeah,
The first time he did that was in C2A. I was in the cell next to him. And I'm just laying there thinking, I can't believe this shit's happening. And I'm laying there on my bunk. And that's out of nowhere. You just hear, oh, Billy. Oh. And I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? What's going on in here?
I remember the first time.
Alex was the greatest. I can't wait to talk to him again.
Yeah, he's a.
He could get out. Oh, Tommy's a free elf. He was a nut.
It's funny. It's like we really were crazy because I remember when McKellop, he first came over from C2A, and he's just walking back and forth. This is before I got to even have a conversation with McKellop. But he comes and he's walking back and forth, and I guess he was an orderly in C2A. He became one in C2B again. But initially, like, he was just kind of like lost. He was just walking back and forth through the jail, and he's looking at all the people around him, man. He's just whispering because, you know, how he talks to himself. And he's just like, this place is a fucking mental asylum. It was just like, yeah, you're right. I didn't get it at the time, but I realized what he meant by that after the fact. It was fucking so funny. But, you know, in terms of, and everybody kind of seems to have a different answer. Do you think there was more animosity from us, or I should say, more animosity towards us from the native guards? And by that, I mean like the native-born Americans. Or do you think there was more animosity from the Africans, the ones that were like here on like work visas and stuff? Because I feel... when I was there, I felt like the Africans fucked with us more, but I thought, looking back on it, I think that's maybe just because I was exposed to them more, because they staffed them more frequently. And the more I think about it, maybe they actually didn't want to fuck with us, but were told to. Like, what do you think was the origin of the fuckery? Let's say.
I would think the latter of what you just said was probably more prominent than not. Africans are a funny little group. The actual Africans, not the brown ones that are here in America, the American brown ones. And it's funny because when I was in the DC jail back in December before for my resentencing, I had a cellie. His name was Tyrone, old fly tie, a good dude, liked the shit out of him. And he was telling me, and it was funny because he was telling me about him having an interaction with one of the African guards. Mm. And the African guard asked him and says, where are you from? And he said, well, I'm African. He goes, I'm African. I'm African American. And the African looks at him and says, no, you're not. He said, you're an American. You're a brown American. I'm African. He said, you're not African, bro. He said, we used to take your brown people and we used to imprison them and we sold you guys to over here. So you're not African. Well, he was harsh. He straight up was harsh. And which is what I thought was an interesting dynamic, because in reality, the brown inmates and the African guards are almost the exact same dynamic it was back before they sold them to America. Because it was the Africans that were incarcerating and imprisoning the brown people of that area, and then they sold the brown people to us on this side of the globe. And that's what he was explaining to Tyrone. And I thought, well, that is interesting. I never thought of that in that context. But that African was like, no, you're not African at all. You have no idea what you're talking about. But the Africans are people. They're prominently. They're the people that do. They're the guards. They're always the guards. That is what Africans that are from Africa seem to always tend to be doing. They're the guards in the DC jail. They do what the higher ups tell them to do as guards, and they don't think twice about what that entails. If they're told to retaliate, they retaliate. Yeah. If they're told to do something, they do it. But we were getting a lot of retaliation and a lot of hate from just the brown Americans, the black or brown Americans that just hated us because they had this weird narrative stuck in their head that we were white supremacists, insurrectionist, terrorists and stuff. And so they just literally some of them just hated us.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the Africans were basically punching bags for the upper brass, like because the upper brass were just, largely, I mean, I'm just going to say, I don't give a fuck at this point, fucking fat lesbian African Americans who were politically intolerant of us. So like
were they African Americans or were they just brown Americans?
I don't that's above my pay grade. I don't fucking know. I disavow. But when you look at like Lancaster and you look at a lot of I think that the wardens and the deputy wardens and the upper brass, I think that they yeah, like you said, they would tell the Africans to come fuck with us, and I don't think they necessarily wanted to.
I don't think they did either. I think they just did it like I was explaining a minute ago. It's because
Yeah.
they are just typically, they're the guards. They're just there to do whatever job they're told to do.
Yeah, and they're on visas.
There's a few of them that they just didn't dislike us. They didn't mind us. They actually liked us better than most of the people they had to watch in other pods.
Yeah. Well, 'cause, I mean, what's a better alternative? Being able to sleep at a mahogany desk surrounded by fucking supposed insurrection versus having to hide in a bubble in one of those other pods where they would throw piss and shit cocktails at you.
Yes. That's exactly what we would do too.
Yeah. But then, at the end of the day, like, I think that they were in a rough position because they, at least this is the way Kenny described it to me. He said that they were there on work visas, and they couldn't leave their job even if they wanted to. So like they had to basically do what they were told. But then I think of the, let's say the native guards, the indigenous guard. I keep saying that now. I feel like I'm going to get hurt over that in the future. Indigenous guards were, they had a chip on their shoulder for actual political and social bias. Yeah. But over time, I think some of that. Okay. Some of them were just.
We won some hearts and minds. We won some hearts and minds when we were there. For sure.
I think so. I'm not going to say. I'll just say Officer A would let us out all day after like the first year. Officer A was very good to us. And I think he had apprehensions about us at the beginning, but then he would come all the time. So, cause he knew he'd get overtime and he could just chill, and he was very good to us, I think. And then there were some others. They were just like, occasionally they would do us a favor, and they knew it was just a nice way to get downtime was to come to our unit. And then you still had motherfuckers that just wanted to fuck with us for no reason.
They would just show up, and it's like, we've never seen them before, and they would show up just to be as the most atrocious human being that they could be.
Yeah.
And that was when we would kick doors. we would kick doors simultaneously in unison in solidarity until they changed that piece of crap out.
Oh,
exactly. Oh yeah.
Hey, do you remember? Oh God, do you remember that a couple times this guard came in and he would just lock us down and he would just say, "Oh, he's he needs to leave so he can go get his steak or something like that." What the fuck was?
Yeah, what was his? I don't remember.
Was it Alan or something like that? I don't remember. It was this older guy, and he seemed cool at first. But he just didn't want to do his job, so he just fucking lock us down. It was just like, and I don't think that came down from above at all. I think that was just pure laziness.
It was just lazy, arbitrary decisions. They would lock us down arbitrarily and sometimes administratively because they had, Employee Appreciation Day. We'd be locked down while they ate steaks. Like,
every day was Employee Appreciation Day when that motherfucker was there.
When he was there, for sure.
Yeah.
He's the only one that would do it, and it's like, well, it's only happening when you're here, asshole.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was a big thing too, because there were arbitrary lockdowns. Initially, of course, the Trojan horse was COVID, but even eventually, like, they stopped with that facade, but they would still randomly lock us down, and it's just, I mean, I don't know. Would you be? Could you describe for those listening, like, why is that a big deal? What is arbitrary? Like, what is an administrative punishment? What are these things? Like, why is it not cool to do that?
Well, it's actually against it's against your due process and your civil rights. I mean, you can't just sit here and we're pre-trial. You're pre-trial inmates. You're not even convicted. And you're already being locked down, 23, 24, 22 hours a day. And then they're going to come in and even wreck that out. And you're stuck 24 hours for however many days they arbitrarily or randomly decide just because they want to. And then you turn around and you get locked down for administrative purposes. We're like, oh, we're understaffed, so you guys can't get out for 24 hours, 2 or 3 days or whatever. Which it's like, well, that's the administration. You just because you're understaffed doesn't mean we have to suffer. And they're like, oh yeah, well, it pretty much means you got to fucking suffer. And it's like, well, again, we're back to the due process rights you're screwing us over on. and you're violating our rights. But they didn't give a shit about that.
Yeah.
And they would lock us down for, punitive reasons. They would lock us. We spent, I think it was a week, maybe 2 weeks. We were locked in our cells for 24 hours a day because of whatever happened with whatever happened in the day room with some other, a couple of people that got into an argument or whatever. I forget. I remember exactly who it was and all that stuff, but I'm not going to drop names today in school. But they got into a situation, and it was between the guard in one of them, and the rest of us got, we all got locked down. And it's like, well, so you're doing it arbitrarily, however you want to, whenever you want to, because you're assholes for whatever reason. You hate us because you hate us. And then you do it arbitrarily. You do it arbitrarily. You do it administratively because you're short and understaffed. And you turn right around and you punish us for something we weren't technically involved with. And so we spent, I calculated 227 days of solitary confinement, technically.
Yeah. I would add the caveat that they definitely anus 100%. They very much anus. At least in DC, that's what I hear. None of my business.
It was a bunch of shit.
Well, speaking of shit, I remember I was supposed to go to trial in November of 21, and they ended up using COVID as an excuse to push my trial back to the spring of 22. And so that would have placed me as the first trial. I think it ended up being the third or fourth. You got the first trial, and this was a big deal. So let's, I guess, start from the beginning when it comes to your trial. Like, could you take us through your voir dire hearings and what was that like? What was it like picking a jury in Washington, D.C. after January 6th?
Well, it was definitely the most eye-opening thing I've ever seen. I've never really seen anything so against a person's rights. Whenever they're asked, every one of them are asked about, do you know anything about January 6th, one of the most prominent days in a very small district's life, and a lot of them were like, no, I don't really follow it. And it's like, what? Okay. It's on the news every day. It was on the news for a lot. I don't know how you missed all that. And the streets were blocked off and all that stuff because they were going ham on us. But then they were asked, some of them were asked, a lot of them were asked actually, what do you know about January 6th? And a lot of them were like, well, I know they're all guilty. And the judge would say, well, can you see past that? Do you think you can get past that and, and follow my directions and make an objective ruling, a verdict at the end? And they're like, no, I don't think so. I don't know. But you don't, just as you don't think so? Or you can't? Well, I guess I could. Oh, so you could follow my directions and you could eventually, in the end of the trial, you could, give an objective verdict. And, well, I guess I could. You guess you could, or you know you could? Well, I could. And the judge, then all of a sudden it's like, well, you're a juror.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what? What the fuck just happened? You literally just talked this person into being a juror.
Right. Yeah.
And it was disgusting. And I've never seen anything like that. And that happened over and over and over again. And we kept striking for cause, some of them, that we could get away with striking. But some of them were there literally when they found out they were going to be on a January 6th trial. You could tell they were gearing themselves into that spot the best they could.
Yeah. Yeah.
My attorney was not helping. He was making it worse. Mm. He was doing everything he could to help out the prosecutor and get the worst jury he could see.
I remember I remember the exact same situations happening with me. The judge, I guess the rule is that as long as they attempt to cure the prospective juror of bias, then as long as they attempt to do that, then it's totally cool. Then there's no bias. And that is not how anything, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Oh, are you a biased piece of shit? Yeah, I fucking hate that. I fucking hate that defendant. Well, what if I asked you not to? I mean, fine. You're in.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's what it was. I went to the exact same thing.
I guess I can follow your directions, and I mean, since you're a judge and you think I can, I guess I think I can with you.
Right.
Fuck out of here.
These are extremely biased, and and this, I think this is important too, because with the exception of the Oath Keepers, like you're one of the first, defendants from the Gulag, or really just J6ers I've talked to, in an interview like this that's actually gone to trial. And so like myself, I know you must have been sitting there like, this is fucked. And so like I have to ask, like, what kind of people were even on your jury? Because for me, it's DC. A lot of these people aren't just biased; they're government employees, and they wanted retribution. They tried to seat someone from Chuck Schumer's office on my jury. So I mean, what kind of people did you come across on your jury? DOJ lawyers? What was up with you?
Yeah, there were people. Now I'm not exactly sure who was actually seated, but most of the people that we went through voir dire with were either working for the architect of the Capitol, they were lawyers in the area, or they were. I mean, I think one of them was even a school teacher. They were almost all federal employees of some aspect or another, which means that they're sucking off the teat of the government who's trying to convict me. So of course, they don't want to go up against their paycheck.
Yeah. What's interesting is, I believe Pete Schwartz's lawyer, they made an interesting argument for change of venue. I believe the argument was essentially that we've been told this whole time that Washington, D.C. was the victim, right? So if D.C. is itself the victim, how could the residents of D.C. be the ones seated on the jury? You never allow the victim to be the judge, jury, and executioner. That's not really justice. I think if there was ever a time when someone should have gotten change of venue, it was in relation to January 6th. Not only because everybody there, well, one, they're all leftists. Two, they're all biased because they were there. Three, they all work for the alleged victim, the government. But, four, keep in mind too, not only are they all from DC and probably, formed a collective bias against us or perceived the events, watched the history. DC is very small. So, the pool of jurors is all concentrated essentially in that area. So it's not just that they're from the area. Like there's a lot of people who are from, let's say, Alaska, right? But they're not all near the Aleutian Islands, let's say. You could potentially find an unbiased jury for something that happened somewhere in any state, but DC is so fucking small. The concentration of potential jurors is insane. So, that the whole situation with the jurors is just it's just yeah.
And that in itself it just circles right back around to the orchestrated situation.
Right.
It was all the government knew, just like with Trump and Jack Smith, they knew that if they could get this to go forward in DC, they would get their win.
Yeah.
They knew it.
No question.
No doubts.
Yeah.
And they actually made sure they argued that. For my transfer or my change of venue, I had one of the most compelling situations and arguments that I could bring forward. Now, we brought forward the poll that they did on, the district and the people of the district about their understandings of January 6th and the dynamics, the political dynamics of it. We brought all that forward, but I also, one of the situations and one of the charges was my son, which we spoke about that earlier. And that agent and a lot of that stuff was down in Texas. So I should have been able to move back down to Texas for my trial. And that would have shown a difference in the way the jury pool would have looked at the case, and they would have likely, potentially have ruled in a different way for the verdict. But they weren't going to have it. They were like, "Ooh, no," because if it happens and Mr. Reffitt gets that, then we've lost all chance of getting anything done like we want to in D.C.
Yeah.
Then if I would have got my change of venue, then it would have opened up a bigger door
Pandora's
for
box.
other folks.
Yeah.
Other folks would have been able to follow my brake lights right into the ditch of insanity that these people were trying to put over on us.
Yeah, and it was also the first trial to have the 1512 on the table as well.
Couldn't allow me to go to Texas and do it because that would have screwed up every part of the orchestrated plan they had, and everybody would have broken everything that they wanted. So they weren't going to give it to me; they weren't giving it to anybody.
Yeah, and I think frankly, even deep blue states would have been a better option than DC. I think I would have had a better option. I know I would have had a better chance in New Jersey than in Washington, D.C. So you do the voir dire hearings. They're stacking your jury with biased jurors, people who have, let's be frank, people who have open contempt for you and everything you believe in. People who have open contempt for Trump. People who, frankly, know you're guilty before they even hear any of the evidence. What happens after voir dire? You start your trial, and how does that unfold?
So it was a 7-day trial, and we didn't defend. We watched a 7-day spectacle. The first few days was stuff that had nothing, absolutely zero to do with me. It had nothing. I wasn't in any of the videos. I wasn't discussed in any of the things that were put before the jury. Compilation videos of things that went on that day. None of it had any of me. It didn't have me in any of it. They discussed the constitutional electoral count process. Again, not in the building, not involved in all that shit. Nothing to do with me. They talked to other individuals that they brought before the jury, and again, none of it to do with me. It was long into the process that had, that they actually started even talking about what I did. And watching the whole show of the government putting it on was just insane. The opening statements of the prosecutor was just theatrics. Just total theatrics. Jeffrey Nestler just busted out in this dramatic show for the opening statements to show the jury. And then they went into their little old show, and it was just a big stage game. It was a big theatrical game.
What, I know that the gun was something that they really kind of had to pull shit out of their ass for, but in terms of the evidence, you had mentioned the compilation video. I similarly had to sit through this ridiculous, almost hour-long presentation of compilation video of people doing things I had nothing to do with. I remember there was a particular point where there was a breach between what they call Crypt Lobby East and the Capitol Visitor Center, and somebody picks up a garbage can and throws it at a cop. I wasn't even there. I'm not in that video, but you could hear my jury gasp. It was the whole room was silent, and you just heard, and I was like,
no prejudice to the jury there, right? No prejudice. Right. Yeah. Don't worry about the man behind the mask or the curtain.
Well, yeah, and it's just crazy. And keep in mind also, half my jury was also asleep. So it's just what? It's just, what, how did you feel? Again, you're watching this, it's irrelevant bullshit. But when it came to actually reviewing the evidence about you, your conduct, the allegations against you, you said you didn't defend, so you're basically just watching. You're just watching, kabuki theater. Basically, it's all bullshit. But like, how did you feel sitting there, watching them supposedly meeting their burden, quote unquote? Like, what was it? What was just like? What was it? What was the experience like? Were you watching the face of your judge, the jury members? What the hell was it like in there?
Well, I can tell you what I would have. So I've never been, but it felt like rape.
That's not funny. That's not funny at all.
It's horribly funny because it's as close as I can get to what happened to me. It's like I was there. I was watching it. I was hoping it wasn't happening, but it was clearly happening.
Mr. Prosecutor, or no means no. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, it was pretty atrocious. I thought, man, I'm literally don't know any other way to explain it, but I feel like you guys are all fucking me right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so bad. And I'm just watching the show, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really happening, and I can't stop what's happening. Again, I'm back to this rape analogy. Because, so then I realized, after all of that, of course, I just sat there and took it, and since then, I'll never, ever do that again. I'll never just take it. I'm going to keep swinging all the way out of life. I'm not doing that again. That's crazy.
Yeah. What can you can you like break down? You don't have to go into too much detail, but like, could you break down like some kind of like some of the lies and stuff, the kind of the bullshit that they tried to pass off as evidence when you were enduring all this? Like, I recall, because it wasn't just the alleged possession of a weapon. It wasn't like, I remember one of the things was the alleged threatening of a witness when it came to your son. I recall, did he not like do an interview where he said, "No, I never actually felt threatened"? Like,
yeah. My understanding is that my daughters have recordings and videos and interviews that he's done in 9 different situations in that he said that he never felt threatened. And that was turned over to my attorneys, but they didn't give a shit. That's the other problem with the system is these attorneys, they're not here to help us. They're not our friends. All they want you to do is take a plea deal and get out the way so they can get the next person in so that they can get the money from that case so they can, pay the payment on that Mercedes Benz and, afford those 2 side chicks or whatever they're doing with our money. But they're clearly busy with it. And the quicker they can get us out of the way with plea agreements, the quicker they can make that money. I think plea agreements are the most detrimental thing this country's ever allowed happen to itself in the judicial system.
That was actually going to be my next question, because I mean, look, at some point, a lot of people, had their hopes crushed, and they just kind of started caving and taking the pleas. And I know, like, a lot of them. And again, I'm a bum. I don't have a wife or kids, so it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was my place to judge them for taking the plea or whatever. But it seems to be, when I asked the question, like, what was your motivation for how you decided to resolve your case, whether taking a plea or going to trial? Again, pretty much everybody took a plea by the end of it, and the motivation seemed to have always been, I don't want to die in prison, and I want to see my kids, I want to see my family. You went to trial. I went to trial. A couple of us actually went to trial. We put the government to its burden. Why did you do it? Why do that? How did you assess the risks? What motivated you to go to trial and put the government to its burden?
Well, let me first of all state that I don't judge anybody for taking their plea agreements. I get it.
Yeah,
they're scary. The whole process is meant to scare you into the plea agreements. I get it, but we got to stop. But as and I'm not judging anybody who did. I'll be judging everybody after I keep saying stop taking plea agreements in America. Stop it. We're just break the system, bring it to its knees, bring it crumbling down by taking them to trial every time. But in the past, I get it. I mean, it's plea agreements are people saying I'm guilty of something, whatever they wrote in that, and you sign, you're guilty of that when you sign it.
Statement
and
of facts.
I can't do that. I cannot live with the lies that I would be signing to, even though I know that it would get me out sooner. I'm not that guy. I'm a constitutional believer. I believe in my Sixth Amendment right to trial, and I, in my mind, logically, even with my limited knowledge of the law, was that you're gonna go before a jury, and they're gonna hate me, and they're gonna convict me, and I get it because it's DC, but that's not where I care to win. I don't see any win in that. But not by signing a plea agreement, I don't get to go to that next stage, which the next stage is appeals, where there's 3 judges. And even though I get there just about as bad as the jury, they're still supposed to look at your case on legal merit and not political ideology or partisan bullshit. So go ahead and just go to trial, get slayed, know they're going to wreck you out, and take it to appeals.
Yeah.
That's why the trial, we went in with a public defender, because I didn't have the money, and we had a very good support group financially. The Patriot Freedom Project was very helpful, but we didn't ask till we got to the appeals. And a lot of people were helping us out with their lawyers, but I thought, I'm not gonna sit there and ask anybody to help me out to try to get through a trial that I'm gonna lose. I'll wait and ask a little bit of help, ask for some help on the appeals, and try to go hard with the appeals with the best attorney I can go fight with. To me, I look at everything in the analytical sense, the logical processes, and try to break it down to Occam's razor, simplify it, And so that's the way I took it, and I wasn't going to bend the knee to these authoritarian, tyrannical piece of shit people that were going to put me through it anyway.
Yeah.
So trial seemed like the most logical thing to do for me.
Yeah. I think it's important, people, like, for those, like, I'm glad most people probably don't have to go through this system. Well, I can't even be sure at this point. Like, everybody in America is turning into a criminal, it seems, but everybody's on the chopping block.
It's the plea agreements, because because if they want to give you a conviction, they will, and if they'll get you to plea out, and they can, and they do it every time.
Yeah, and the thing is like with the plea deals, and like, so here's both sides of it, right? So, like, from my perspective, those that take a plea deal, they get a 3-point reduction in their sentencing guidelines for quote unquote taking responsibility. But if you go to trial, you lose, you can get a 3-point enhancement for providing materially false testimony or some bullshit. So that's a 6-point difference, a 6-point swing theoretically in terms of guilt by plea or guilt by trial. And that can have a massive difference in how you're sentenced. However, as you just said, when you take a plea deal, you waive your right to you waive your right to appeal. You waive a lot more rights than people might expect, or people might think. And
well, there's also that, and there's also, and a lot of people do not take this into account, and it buggers the brain every time I think about it. But in that plea agreement, there's a forfeiture agreement. When you sign that, you forfeit everything they seized from you. So, and when they seized my electronics from my home, they seized every bit of my children's growing up, their childhood, pictures and videos. I put everything digitalized on those hard drives. I don't care about the firearms, I can get more guns if that's the case. But I couldn't replace those things. And signing a plea agreement meant the forfeiture. They gave them the ability to take everything they seized, and I'd never see it again.
Yeah.
So when you plea out, you lose it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I didn't take a plea deal, so it didn't apply to me. But even actually thinking about it even more, this wasn't necessarily seized when they took my property, but they wiped all my social media when I got arrested. They got rid of my graduation photos from school. They got rid of my military graduation photos, family photos, all my memes and all my satire. Like they completely nuked that. And I can never get that back. And so, but then when I think about it, I also had stuff on my electronics. They took like $3,000 or more, like took thousands of dollars of electronics, computers and all that. Had nothing to do with my case. They just took my property. And that's the stuff that would have helped me prove I was a satirist instead of a domestic terrorist. They took that shit. And so I couldn't defend my character. But I never signed a plea. And they've been holding off on returning that to me for 4 years now. So,
have you got it back yet?
Fuck no. No. You know what's funny? I don't know if you saw this. A couple days ago, the FBI came to my house from the Newark station up here in Jersey, not out of DC where they have all my real property. They handed me off a postcard. Like, oh, this came to the Navy base you lived on after you were arrested. What? You held on to a postcard at the Newark FBI office? And guess where the return address was? The Russian embassy in DC. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. This is bullshit. You were trying to set me up as some kind of spy or some bullshit. Like, this is crazy. And like, why would you hold on to this for 4 years? And I'm looking at it and I'm reading the postcard and it says two things. One, thank you for defending the white race against the Negro and the taco eater. I'm like, all right, this is a troll. But then I'm looking at it like, oh, by the way, we have money for you. Call these numbers. It was like a number out of Florida and a number out of Nevada. I'm like, I ain't calling that shit. You're out of your fucking mind. I'm like, that's fucking weird. That was definitely some kind of setup or some kind of troll or something. But very weird. I didn't even know that postcard existed. They were willing to give me that though. They weren't willing to give me my actual property that they've been holding on to for 4 years. Very fucking weird to me.
That is.
Yeah.
It doesn't shock me anymore, though. It doesn't shock me, but it is weird.
Yeah. Well, nothing shocks me at this point. But I never responded to any of the mail I got when I was in DC. None of it. I got a lot of mail. We all got a lot of mail, and I'm grateful for that. But I didn't trust any of it.
I definitely love it all.
Yeah.
I did go back with some of them, but it was very few.
Yeah.
Only certain ones I would write back, but I love them all. I have every bit of them that I kept. I got pretty much kept everything. They sent me all the ones from the Bureau of Prisons showed up here at the Eagle's Nest. So we have all of that. I lost a few, but very few.
I'm very grateful for it, but I was always because they read the mail, and I was always suspicious that some of it was just planted for like some kind of, because we were in a honeypot. We were in a psyop within a psyop when we were in the gulag. They monitored everything. We were in a controlled environment, and I felt, this is just me personally, like I am positive a lot of the mail was fake. And like I got this letter once from this white nationalist organization because I'm the Nazi guy, right? And it was like, oh, we're the Global Minority Initiative. Let us know if you need any puzzles or books, brother. I'm like, I'm not responding to this shit, you fucking Fed.
Get out of here with that shit.
Yeah, it's Fed as fuck. Get the fuck out of here. I
got something similar to that in the Bureau of Prison once I got there, and I was like, what the hell is this? And the one guy who has "Kampf" tattooed on the back of his head, I was like, you want this? He goes, hell no, I'm not doing anything with that. Get rid of it. I was like, well, I don't want it. I was like, I don't know, bro. I thought you was a white man. I thought you was into that. And he goes, I am, but I ain't touching that. I said, okay, buddy.
I'm a Nazi, but I'm not stupid.
I'm just one of those, but I'm not touching that.
I got weird shit in the mail sometimes. It was there was one time someone would just mail me random like pictures from like a magazine, and it was just like random pictures. It was like weird. It was almost like it was some kind of code. I'm like, what the fuck? I didn't even want to have it. I just fucking would like throw it out or flush it or something like that. It was very weird.
And that's when we had to squeegee the floors in the pod. With the mops and squeegee it to the shower because the toilet would overrun because, man, it was so many things getting flushed down those toilets.
Ugh. Okay, I remember one time, fucking, I think it was Geese Swine. He would flush like a toy, was like tuna packets down there, like whole tuna packets. I was like, you can't fucking do that. What are you doing?
Totally do. What are you talking about? He's totally doing it.
Yeah.
He's really doing it.
It's going down. Where the fuck is my pizza? Yeah, so it was fucking weird. It was a huge tangent, but yeah, the mail, I was, it was very consoling to know that so many, like, a lot of Americans didn't understand our circumstances, but once they heard of them, like when they found out, they genuinely dedicated so much of their time to,
that was all very amazing. It swells your heart up to see how much people cared.
Yeah.
And still care.
Yeah. But I didn't trust it. I still didn't trust it. It just,
it's hard to trust because
risk and reward.
Where you're at and how we got there, it's like, I don't know what you trust anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's risk or reward. You say the wrong thing in the mail, you know that several people got hit on that. I remember, I think, someone had written, because you know what it is too, like, you remember McKellop, he got raided by the FBI.
I was just thinking that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's because he trusted someone on the outside with his login information, I guess, for the evidence.com thing. And understandably, like, he was desperate for anybody to fucking, like, hear what actually happened and to get the truth out. Because nobody gave a fuck about us in the beginning. He was desperate to be heard. And then he trusted someone he shouldn't have trusted. I warned him not to. And they, I guess they were passing around his information, and they knew someone was trying to access it. And lo and behold, I get up one day, I go out to my door, I'm like, what the fuck's going on? McKellop's in my window with his hands cuffed. I'm like, what the fuck's going on? And he just looks at me and he's like, he mouths the letters FBI. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And there's just these fucking nerds in khakis are taking all his shit out of his cell. I remember
pictures, documenting everything, just like they did when they raided the house, except for without the flashbangs.
It was so funny though, because they found his they found like his Morse code, and they're like, "What the fuck is this shit? This dude's a professional."
Well, yeah, y'all fucking trained him for 22 years.
Yeah. I was like, "What did you think would happen?" But Dio Presse Libre or whatever the fuck. Yeah, man, this is what I'm saying. This is just like fucking Sear School, man. That dude's a player. Yeah, McKellop's a fucking hoot. I
love McKellop. I kept checking on him. I was like, Nicole, where's McKellop? How's he doing?
Yeah.
I ran into a guy that was in the facility with him in Fort Worth. This guy was a kook, but he was funny, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I know that guy," and I was like, "Oh yeah." I did a couple of Jeff's moves, and he goes, "Yeah, that's him." I said, "Oh yeah, that's McKellop. That's my buddy there. That's some bitch right there. He's towed off."
Yeah, man, cause I stab people. Oh wow, you're a virile young man, huh? Yeah, alright, cool. Oh man, the fucking stories.
Just be dissing and everything.
Yeah, he be trumping. I tell you, he be trumping. Fucking, oh my god, McKellop, man, that was fucking. Well, hell, what?
back on track again.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, so, all right, so you're going through this bullshit. The jury's biased. They're putting a bunch of nonsense out there, but they're passing it off as evidence. You said it was a 7-day trial. You go in there. What was it like sitting there and just waiting for your verdict?
That was crazy. Yeah, when it come down to it, and you watched everything, and it's like in the back of your mind, you're thinking, after what I just watched, as insane as that was, in your mind, you're thinking, they might actually rule in my favor. And it's like, it looks promising because there's what they call beyond reasonable doubt.
Mm.
And then they come back with guilty verdict all the way across the board, and you're like, but there was reasonable doubt. What the fuck is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
And, in the back of your mind, you knew that could possibly be that could happen. And it did. It totally did. It went down just like a fat boy on a seesaw. Just like that.
How long did it take for them to convict you? Did they at least wait for lunch so I could get a free lunch? Like, how long did they take?
The funny, not funny part was that, it was actually, I think it was close to 3 hours, but it would have been like 2 hours because, they had to take lunch. And one of the jurors was quoted later saying that, what did that person say? Oh, well, he was guilty, but we wanted to make sure we got lunch because yesterday the sandwiches were to die for.
Wow.
And that's a quote from a juror that they caught. My understanding is that's on record somewhere. That's pretty awesome, isn't it?
It's pretty awesome. Yeah. I'm glad to know the jurors.
A little bit longer, yeah.
Glad to know the jurors took their job seriously.
Absolutely, yeah. And the food's good in DC, apparently.
Depending on where you are, I guess. Depending on where you are.
You live in DC right now, and it doesn't seem like it's that great
Yeah.
here.
And overpriced, I'm sure. Fucking so you get the luxury or you get the honor, Mr. Reffitt, of taking the first big L in trial. So congratulations. It's a privilege to speak with you.
Hey, I had the highest sentence at the time, and if you're not first, you're last, Ricky Bobby.
That doesn't even make any sense. You could be second. You could be third. Hell, you could be fourth. Yeah. Fucking hell. I remember, and it is slightly less funny, but I remember you coming back from that, and we had a guard on the block that was just one, new, and two, stupid. And I remember you just needed time to think and process that shit. And for no reason, they just locked the doors so you couldn't get back in your cell. And they almost never did that. And you're just like, can I open my cell? And they're like, wandering around, trying, picking their ass, whatever they're doing. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. And you're just like, fuck! Open my fucking cell!
Yeah. And it's, never does an inmate say, I want to get in my cell.
Right.
In my cell.
There's a problem. Yeah. There's a problem. Yeah. What,
I was feeling quite exposed and my emotions were all over the place. And I was like, I don't want to be out here and exposed at this very moment. So open the fucking door. And, and I'm a very quiet person. I'm normally not a very loud speaker, and but when I'm mad, it's loud.
Yeah. Well, I also,
rattled her apparently because she come flying over there pretty quick with those keys, and she couldn't figure out what key.
She was genuinely shook. She was shook. But I'm so I mean I know there was a lot that must have been going through your head after that, but. One thing that I vividly remember, I remember your wife, Nicole, she stood in front of a bunch of reporters and she stood her ground and she was just like, don't take plea deals. They want to fucking destroy you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but, she made it very clear that the verdict should not deter anybody from putting the government to its burden. And I think that was, I mean, again, over time, people just kind of started caving, but that was very encouraging at the time. I went to trial we didn't have a lot of people racing to go to trial after that, but I think it was important that you did go, that you were the first person to fall on the sword there. I think that they were expecting a lot less resistance than they got from us. And I think that maybe even they expected that the first guilty verdict would have deterred people, and yet it maybe it did for some, but I know that for a lot of us, we still were in our heads like, that shit sucks, but we have to do this. We have to keep fighting, or, all our asses are going to be on the chopping block regardless. The truth is never going to get out, and they're gonna be able to do this forever. So I mean,
and that's a lot of it. Is you're looking at the situation and you're asking yourself, can you live with yourself allowing this to go down like that? And that's part of the situation. Is that my wife stood out there and she was absolutely correct in saying that. And I see some of the people that since I've been incarcerated, some of the people that I met in prison, and they act like they're so stiff and they're so hard and they're so tough. And I typically ask them, are you going to take a plea agreement? Hell yeah, I'm going to take a plea agreement. They're going to smoke me. You're not that fucking tough then. So don't come over here and act tough around me, because I don't feel like you're that man you're trying to put off to be. And I'm not, that's probably not the best way to look at it, but it didn't matter how big they were and how tough they thought they were when they realized that I went to trial and I was calling them out on their weakness, that they weren't going to fuck with me.
Yeah.
Because I'm willing to do what is right, and I was willing to do what was right on that and go into trial on that specific situation. And I know that that's not an easy thing for some people to do, but that is literally changes the dynamic of the human mind when it comes to how strong really are you.
Yeah.
How patriotic, how true to your constitutional ideology and the belief of this fundamental values that this country was built on. And that's where you have to ask yourself, are you truly an American patriot?
Yeah. A lot of people were, I guess when it comes down to it, they thought that they were making the pragmatic decision in taking a plea, but it's a sketchy situation, and it's hard to, I get it. I get it. But at the same time,
I'm still not happy about the fact that people did it, knowing that, we started right off the rip.
Yeah.
Doing it the right way.
Well, it's worth noting. Look, not for nothing, you still fell on the sword, even though you have a wife and kids. You had a family too. It's hard to criticize someone for willing to have their ass burn on the cinder when they're in the same circumstances as everyone else who's not willing to do it. I remember, everybody would hang out in each other's cells and stuff like that. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school here. Your cell was covered in pictures of your family. I know you thought about them every day. Every day. I remember you would leave notes out for yourself. Remember, you're doing this for your family. Like that is, look, even if someone didn't have family to suffer for, your country is kind of your family as well. And so, that's kind of how I looked at it as well. It's like, I didn't want to be someone who let a bad precedent stand for someone else to get hit with. That's why I wanted to fight in trial. That's why I wanted to fight the enhancements. Even a small win, I thought was a win for someone else in the future. Even being in that shithole jail, even being in that gulag, like some people were willing to rat on other people in order to get out. Tom Civic, and it's like, well, you know what? I would rather be in this shithole jail than somebody else. I know that's kind of like maybe not the best, maybe it's not the best gamble, but it's
we also have, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we also have the variable that comes into play where, knowing that a plea agreement's not going to get the truth out. The truth only comes out, and it only barely come out in part and parcel through trial. They withheld and suppressed and kept so many things back, but still some things did get out, and some things did get through the trials, the few that did happen, and that was important. That changed. If everybody took plea agreements, nobody would really ever know much about January 6th.
Absolutely. And if more people would put the government to their burden, they would have suffered more. They would have suffered longer, but they couldn't keep it all under wraps forever. I wish, we had solidarity in many regards, but I wish everybody had solidarity in their willingness to fall on the sword. But not my call. Everybody,
not my call either,
yeah, but
I have a sad spot in my heart for the whole situation in that aspect. I get it, and some people have families, and I had one too. I have family too.
Yeah.
But there's certain moral values that you have to remember, that you are who you are when it's over.
Yeah. Yeah. And moving on from trial, you get convicted. You're still in the gulag for a little bit, but eventually, you do, eventually the BOP, it's interesting. For some people, I remember, people would get convicted, usually by a plea deal or whatever. And sometimes they would spend months inside the jail before they finally got picked up and moved.
I think mine was, I want to be honest with you, I think mine was 7 weeks.
7 weeks?
Maybe not.
I don't know. I feel like you got, well, the other way, you got moved fairly quick after your sentencing. I think Cleve and Scott, they were lingering like, and I love them both. I don't mean this offensively. Like they lingered in the jail like a fart, and they're always like, why am I still here? But you got moved quicker than them. So, if you could take me through that journey. You finally, you get picked up by the BOP. And, for those that don't know, typically, you're leaving because they give you a COVID swab or something like that the night before. You leave. Where do you go from there? Where do you go from the DC gulag after about 2 years?
Yeah, so I left and went immediately from there. I went to Cimarron Facility Detention Center in Oklahoma, in Cushing, Oklahoma, actually. Oof. And I spent a week there.
It's a gang unit, isn't it?
No, it depends on which pod you're in there, which unit. It varies. It's an old state prison, but it's now the central hub of transport for federal transfer.
Okay.
One of the major hubs. It holds quite a few inmates, somewhere close to 1,000 or better, or more than 1,000. But I stayed there for a week, and then I left that particular spot to go straight to the BOP. Another thing about that is that I live close to Dallas, and the judge was supposed to put me close to Dallas, but I ended up in El Paso, which is like 12 hours from Dallas, which was expected to be, the kind of garbage they were going to put me through. And then I sat in the BOP for 3 months, and they dropped that new indictment on me, and then I was pulled out of there and took back to Fannin County in Bonham, Texas, and I spent a year in that jail. In an 8-man pod. And then I left that jail after a year and went back to Cimarron Facility for 5 months. And then I left there, went back to Fannin County, and then from Fannin County to Okmulgee County Jail in Oklahoma. And then Okmulgee County Jail, I left and went to Grady for a couple of days and flew to D.C. for resentencing. At some point in there, in the middle of all that story I just told, I was at a federal transfer center, which they kept me in the shoe for a week, calling me a domestic terrorist. So.
Oh, Mr. Reffitt, you seem to get around, huh? Wow.
Yeah.
So
nine facilities altogether I'd been in, and just moving all over the place. I was only in the BOP in 4 years. I was in the BOP for 3 months. No programs, no first step back, no good time credit, no RDAP or anything that could lower my sentence. I was robbed of all of that shit.
And this is all on top of the fact that ultimately you go in front of the judge to get resentenced and you still get screwed.
Absolutely. There's that rape factor again I was talking about.
There it is, dry.
People like to say PREA, but they really don't understand. That just means please relax, everything's all right.
Oh my God. Oh my. I disavow some of that. Anyway, but so at the end of the day, all this, you get a couple wins, but for the most part, you're getting really, you're getting really screwed by the system. You get screwed in trial, then you get screwed with resentencing, and ultimately, even when you're out of DC with all the problems there. And again, this is me. I was glad to finally go to prison because the camaraderie was kind of gone by the time I left, and so the jail had really become just miserable. And so, like, I kind of was, me personally, I just wanted to get my sentence done and over with. I wanted to get out there and get closer to home. Meanwhile, you're going to BOP, but you're bounced all over the place. You're not really close to your loved ones. And they're treating you, as you said, as a domestic terrorist. And then on top of that, also, you get hit with another charge. So if you could you explain this other indictment? And in your opinion, do you think this was maybe malicious?
Maybe. Oh no, It was definitely malicious. It could be called anything less than malicious. Lawfare. There's a lot of. It was all pernicious all the way across the board. I mean, they wait almost 2 years to indict me for something they grabbed out of my safe on the day they raided my house for January 6th. That was in 2021, and that was in January. And in December of 2022, nearly 2 years later, they indict me on a homemade firearm suppressor that was in my safe. They waited till after January 6th conviction, which in the way that the sentencing guidelines works is that puts me in a higher category of the sentencing guidelines scale, which went from, I think it was 21 to 33 months up to 33 to 41 months. And so it would have been a 36-month sentence on top of the time that I had already gotten for nearly 7 years or over 7 years for January 6th. So it would have been technically, you could call it a 10-year sentence. And that was about as malicious as you could ask for from the U.S. Department of Justice, their convictions. So the weird thing about it is that's a homemade suppressor that they grabbed, and it's in the state of Texas. That's legal. They're legal to have if they're homemade, and it was homemade. And so you're looking at a whole nother variable of, consecutive sentencing on top of a sentence that's already sitting there. And they indicted me, and then that's what pulled me out of the Bureau of Prisons, was to go back to Texas for that. And then they turn right around, and I go to DC for the resentencing, and the judge gives me a 5-point upward departure by using the suppressor as a way to to drive that sentencing. So to this point, I haven't, I don't know what's happening with that case in Texas since I've already been punished for it.
And this, of course, it goes without saying, this charge is ultimately a result of the raid upon you from January 6th, which you have been pardoned for. And
Correct.
So why continue to prosecute someone from a charge arising from from my perspective, an illegitimate raid? You've been pardoned for January 6th, yet you're still being prosecuted for something that was only brought to their attention as a result of a raid caused by January 6th. So that's where the situation is with you as well. And unfortunately, there are loose ends with other defendants as well. Some people have been charged with firearms and certain things as a result of being raided after January 6th. And so even though they were pardoned for January 6th, they have not necessarily been pardoned for secondary charges arising from their raids. And so even though, fortunately, yes, you're home, you're with your family, you're a free man, you still have this basically hovering over your head, this rain cloud with uncertainty of the future. But going forward, assuming that, and again, ultimately, it seems like a retarded case. I don't expect you to comment on it because, at the end of the day, it's still technically open. But assuming that it is as dumb as it looks, and this kind of falls by the wayside, here we are, over 4 years since January 6th. What would you like the world to know? What would you like the world to know that maybe hasn't been discussed so far? I want to give you, the floor really to discuss anything that you think the public ought to know, but almost certainly has not heard in these last 4 years.
Well, so for me and for my wife and my kids, the government in this situation has destroyed a nearly 20-year career. My wife is living in D.C. We're living here in D.C. because of the fact we lost everything. I've lost my son for now. I hope that that's only temporary.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the fact that the government under the previous administration had the ability to do this to Americans the way they did is a very perfect example of what we fought against and for on that day, and why we were there to speak out, to make a point that we, the people, should not be pushed to the wayside and told that, as Nancy Pelosi so ineloquently put it, when she said, "We feed the people, we feed the people," and that implies that the government is in full control, and it's not the case. In America, we, the people, are the people. We're the constitutional republic. And to destroy me and my family, along with my good friend Tim and all of the other J6ers, for them to have that kind of power is wrong. And now we have to rebuild from where we were. And I was a prosperous working man. And now I have to rebuild and bring all of that back from the grave, I guess, because it's going to be an interesting trip up. But just like in anything else, I'll prosper. So I will prevail over all of this, and I will continue to push forward with prison reform and holding these people accountable for what they've done to all of us. But I'm a very passionate man in what I believe in. I'm a very emotional person. And I don't like the fact that I have lived over 50 years. Oh, stop there. But I've lived over 50 years, and I should never have watched this happen in this country. It should never happen to anyone in this country. Other countries do what they do, but this country is different, and it's supposed to be different for a reason. But building everything back is going to be something that is going to be hard, and I hope that we can get to that point to where it's not as hard anymore.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all that. The only correction I would make is I think the actual quote from Nancy Pelosi was "more scotch." No, it's not. It's probably not true. I don't know. Yeah, Guy, I'm glad you're finally out. I'm glad you've been reunited with your family, and despite despite the situation with your son, I do hope that he softens his heart, and I do hope that you and your son can be a family again as well. You deserve that.
As for my son, the good thing that I like to say, and I like to make sure everybody understands it, is that he's my son.
He always will be.
That I love him, and that the good thing is that he's not dead on a battlefield on foreign soil somewhere. So I still have patience, and I have understanding and belief that it'll work itself out in time, and that he will come to realize that it's not right what he's doing. It's not right what he's done. But I have no remorse, and I have no reason to be angry. I like to think of it as he's very thick-headed and he's very strong in his convictions, kind of like his father. So there you
go. Well, you are a good father. You're a good husband, and I know from my time in jail with you, you're a good person. You're a good man, and you're a good American. You know, I'm glad you're out. I'm glad you're ready to rebuild your life, but I'm also glad, as you just said, that now that you are out, as the next chapter begins, we can fight for justice. We can fight for justice reform, and we can make sure that this kind of shit never happens again. Because nobody deserves to go through what we went through, and it can never be allowed to happen again in America. It's not what this country was founded on. I don't think this country would have even been created if that was a possibility in the back of the minds of the people who made it. You know, it's funny. One of my favorite memories. It was actually, you recall, I was as right now, I was a vampire in the jail. So my sleeping was all messed up. And I remember the morning you were getting taken out, they were about to take you to prison from the jail. And, I was awake because of course I was, very early in the morning. And, you were gathering up all your shit, waiting to get taken out, and almost like Easter eggs. You were planting commissary at people's cell doors. You were leaving shit for people. Because
I knew which parts that everybody liked. I was like, okay, well, I know that this person likes the crackers and this person likes the pickles.
Yeah, it's like a Insurrection Santa Claus. There
you go.
And this is because I'm an asshole. I don't know how I convinced it. I don't remember what the guard's name was, but he just let me out because he knew I was up. And so, we got to hang out for a little bit before you got to leave. I think I was the last person to see you. And I don't know if you remember.
Absolutely right.
I don't know if you remember what I said, but right before they came to take you out, I gave you a hug and I was just like, I'm gonna miss you, guy. It's always nice to have someone around here who only pretends to be retarded. Wink, wink. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh,
yeah. For those that don't know, we didn't really get into this, but I just want to close with you had my back at times when I had a lot of knives that people were trying to put in my back. And I remember with Smocks, I remember I would watch him watch you from the phones. And I remember when one of the first times I talked to you, I was like, hey man, that guy over there is watching you a lot. You should be careful. I never forget loyalty, and I always want to repay it, and I always want to give someone their dues. When you were in there, you created databases for all the different video. You helped me time certain things by cross-referencing timestamps on stuff. You put a lot of effort into watching the video in there. We had a good support network in there, but we also had a good support network within the support network. You were very dedicated to helping people with their cases, finding the video to exonerate people. You helped me smuggle a lot of it out of the jail when I finally left.
Right on. We got some stuff done, didn't we?
Absolutely. And again, I hope that, I was talking to Caldwell the other day, and, we made a lot of notes, and we still have a lot that needs to be done. So we got to get the CCTV out, but we also need to get the body cameras out. We have to, collect our notes together, and we need to put our brains together, and we need to get the truth out once and for all. And I can't think of many more people that I would rather have on my side doing that than you. So when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to getting the truth out,
God love you.
You are the tip of the spear when it comes to the truth.
I just about
the truth. The truth. you probably more than anybody in that jail knows from watching all that video, you know what happened that day, and you can help us get the truth out. And I look forward to watching you, fight for reform and fixing this system after what you've been through. And I look forward to helping you with that. And with that, thank you for talking to me, especially this late. Thank you for giving your story, to the public. I know that it's been a long time. You didn't deserve to be treated the way you were. You didn't deserve to be framed, with the narratives that you unfortunately were hit with like the rest of us. And I think good things are going to come in the future. And I'm looking forward to see you rise above all the bullshit because you deserve it.
You too, brother. You too. We're going to win. We're going to win so much, we're going to get tired of winning.
And not only that, but I think I'm going to close with this. Beep, beep, poo, poo.
Beep, beep, poo, poo.
All right, man. Thank you.
It's been good talking to you, brother. It's been a good time.
God bless you, sir.
God bless you, too. Let's get together and let's do some stuff. We got so much to do. So much to do. It's going to be fun. But this time we're doing it on the free side.
It's a problem.
It could be a problem. Not for us as much as them.
Absolutely.
You know what's funny is they fear us more than we fear them.
Well, I would make a Jefferson quote right now about the government fearing the people, but I don't want Judge McFadden keep me without bail again because of a Jefferson quote. So I disavow disavow Jefferson. It's inappropriate.
Right on.